Oh yeah, it works.
So let me shut it off.
Yeah.
Time for two.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight to the first planning board meeting of 2023. We'll go ahead and get started. Oh, what's that? Oh. Just so everyone is aware, we are recording this meeting as we do now, so just wanted to make sure people know that. All right, we'll go ahead and get started with the continuation of the public hearing for the preliminary site plan review for Twin Pines Housing Trust.
Andrew, you'll just have to flip your mic over and turn the bottom button. There's a little one. There you go. Thanks.
Okay. We're good? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Planning Board, thank you very much for entertaining our request for continuation and for allowing us to come back to you again today. With me, Ken Viscarello, part-time New London resident, full-time attorney doing affordable housing and workforce housing projects around the state. So I'm glad to have Ken here with us. Matt Giffen is our architect with Banwell Architects. Aaron Lambert, Wilcox and Barton are civil engineers. So a lot of time is going to be spent with these two. You're going to hear from me just a little bit to kind of introduce them. When we last, and kind of I'll start at 10,000 feet and say when we last came here to Twin Pines, presented to you a proposal, we said at the time that there were, we were finding a few challenges in the marketplace. We shared with you a concept which had a cul-de-sac in the center of the site, and we've now done a bunch of work refining that, and so I'm happy to turn it over at that point to Matt to kind of go through the plans. He's got some pretty pictures. Architects are really good at doing pretty pictures, but it's, I think particularly for those who may not have seen the site before or may only be somewhat familiar with what we're doing, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and Matt's got a bunch of them. So we're going to let him do that first, and then we'll have Aaron walk you through the various revised plans. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Hello, everybody. Matt Giffen from Banwell Architects. So, how do I move this along? Do I just ask you to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the clicker is not working for some.
Okay, sure. So, as Andrew mentioned, I just wanted to show you the pretty pictures that I've generated. So, big picture on the site, we have a total of 4 new buildings. And for those that know the site, there's 3 existing structures. So, the plan is, and I'm not going to get into the civil component that much. I'm going to let Aaron handle that. So starting with the 3 existing structures, in order to locate the driveway to this property in the ideal location, which is right across the street from the hospital, that would require us to take down the existing farmhouse. And the plan is to leave the garage and the barn as is. And eventually, we have a later phase pending a fundraising success. The old historic barn would be converted into a community room, mail room, package room, and some offices. And then once you get into the site, there'll be 4 new buildings. Each building is a little under 15,000 square feet per building, 2 levels. And the project has a total of 60 bedrooms, 60 units. That's 41 bedrooms and 22 bedrooms. And so I've created a couple different bird's eye views of the site, so we'll just click through some of these. So the second view is hovering over the street out front, looking north. You can see the existing barn and garage on the bottom right, and then our 4 buildings on the top left there. And then the Hannafords and the plaza up high. Oh, that's right. All right, there we go. There we go. I'll try not to poke you guys in the eye with this. And if you can go to the next view, please. Great. So this is a bird's eye hovering between two of the buildings looking north. And really, this is just wanting to show the cul-de-sac planned here that allows for easy fire truck access, school bus access. Playground right down here. Again, this is a lot of this site work is pending fundraising, but our plan is to have a playground for the youngins as well as an ADA accessible pavilion right here. And then if we can go to the next photo, please. So this is kind of like a 3D site plan looking straight down. So again, here's the street here. We enter here, and as mentioned, the new road will be right across the street from the hospital. And just from a circulation, how traffic works perspective, you really want those four-way intersections to be lined up like this. You enter the site, there'll be a parking lot here, a parking lot here, the first two buildings here, roundabout, and then a larger parking lot here. So if you can go to the next photo, please. And then a couple photos just from the ground looking in. So this is from, trying to tell, so this is from the back of the site looking towards the street. And then next photo, please. And then figured we would end on the floor plans. So as mentioned, it's about 7,400 square feet per floor. You enter the main door here into a lobby where there'll be a small mailbox. There'll be a small area for mailboxes and packages, small storage room, different mechanical spaces, and then you have various one-bedroom and two-bedroom units on the first floor. And then you have a set of stairs here, a set of stairs here, which brings you upstairs, where you find another handful of one-bedrooms and two-bedrooms. And upstairs, on both levels, there's a washing machine and dryer. There's no elevators in this, so each level is fully dependent on and they have its own services. So for example, if you live on the first floor, there's no need to go upstairs. One thing that I really appreciate about Twin Pines is energy efficiency is something that they really care about. So our plan is to make this a Passive House certified building, which means that it uses about 90% less energy than your typical building built the same size, built to energy code standards. And one piece about Passive House that I really appreciate is not only the cost savings, but also the comfortability. So for example, if you're standing right next to the window versus at the very, very end of the room, there can only be a 3-degree difference. So you're not ending up with those cold, drafty situations. But the other thing I really appreciate is durability. Every detail is 3D analyzed in a WUFI program, and that prevents condensation in walls, so that prevents the mold and just the sick building syndrome that can happen with these super tight buildings if it's not designed correctly. So what is the next page? I think that might be, yep, this might be time for Aaron, but any questions before we move on? Good? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Again, Erin Lambert, Wilcox & Barton. We're the site civil engineer. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the changes since we were here at the end of October. Before, we had a pretty big open area in the center, a beautiful courtyard. But what we've tried to do, and I think we gave a little preview of this at that meeting, was we've tried to consolidate the site a little bit. It does a couple of things. It will reduce impervious cover. It will reduce the cost of site work. So you'll see that instead of having kind of a one-way raceway with a large green space in the middle, we're going to have more of a standard cul-de-sac. It will still have green space in the middle, and that leaves some more open area, some more green space on the outside of the property. We previously had the playground and the pavilion and community gardens. We were envisioning those in the center, and now they'll just be outside. So if you notice, so these are numbered building 1, 2, 3, 4, if you go counterclockwise. We're looking to really enhance this outdoor space here. So we envision having a pavilion, a playground, community gardens may be located in a couple of places on the site, and they will all be ADA accessible. The other elements of the site are very similar to what you saw. We have reduced the parking a little bit further, but still within the amount that we're requesting a waiver for. So your ordinance requires 2 parking spaces per unit, but as Matt explained, a number of our units are 1 bedroom, and we envision not needing to have 2 cars per unit, and so we'd all like to see less impervious cover. So we're requesting a waiver from the board for 1.5 parking spaces per unit. So for 60 units, that would be 90 parking spaces. The previous plan still had in excess of 100 spaces. The plan before you now has 94. And of those 94, 8 of them are ADA units, and they're located close to the building entrances and also close to the future community center. So of those 94, we would be planning on building 91 immediately. Those are all part of the housing program. And then you'll notice that there are 3 spaces right here that are right next to a courtyard. And that outside courtyard was to create an outdoor space, but it also provides ADA access up to 1 level and down to another. And there'll be 3 parking spaces there, 2 of which will be ADA. So we're proposing we would build those at the time that we did the community center renovation and built that patio. So we would still be building 91, which would be in excess of the 1.5 that we're hoping the board will grant us. There are a series of dumpsters and recycling bins located in 2 locations to make it easy for residents to access them. 2 here at the end of this parking lot and 2 here on the west end. And these ones we feel are a nice proximity to the community center when that comes online. So as Matt stated, the majority of the traffic will be coming in 2-way, but the cul-de-sac is 1-way around. Could you go to the next slide? The other thing that we've been working on, so in addition to designing the grading, we've been looking at how we're going to control the stormwater from the additional impervious we're building. And your ordinance is wonderful in that it encourages the kind of low-impact design that we really like to see. So we have very little curb on the site. We really only have curb where there's a sidewalk. Everywhere else, the stormwater can run off. So we've also decentralized it. We haven't created one giant retention pond that then has, a big release and potential to have to hold water. So you'll see on the screen now there are a number of these blue areas. Those each represent a different way that we are controlling and treating stormwater. These 3 large ones are bioretention, so to the eye they're going to look like vegetation, whether it's grass or plantings, but they're going to serve a really important function, which is to mitigate stormwater flow and treat that stormwater. It will also infiltrate a decent amount of it. All of the buildings have a pitched roof. So you'll notice that around the perimeter of each building, there'll be a stone drip edge. They're designed so that 100% of the water that runs off the roof will be collected in the drip edge and infiltrated. So again, it keeps us from sending it to one central system, and it helps to promote groundwater recharge. Then there'll be a couple of other sort of grass-lined swales around the perimeter of the project. They do a similar function. They'll help guide the stormwater where we want it to, slow it down, treat it, help it infiltrate. And then where we can't do that out at the front because we're just our grades and whatnot and we don't have a place to outlet it, we're going to put a small system underground. So that would be a series of pipes that hold the water and then send it through mechanical filtration out to a catch basin. The project exceeds 100,000 square feet, so it will require a New Hampshire DES alteration of terrain project. So in addition to whatever third-party engineering review this board may require, all of the stormwater and erosion control also has a higher level of review and its permit through the state. And that permit also puts an obligation on Twin Pines as the property owner to maintain these stormwater practices. So that application will come with a stormwater operation and maintenance plan, and they're required to submit to DES annual records that they've maintained those. So it's a really good belt and suspenders to make sure that the things we design on day one get built and then get maintained properly. Oh, sorry, next slide. The site will be fully serviced by underground utilities. We have underground water, sewer, electric, telecom. On the screen, you'll see the green is sewer, blue is water. We've been in talks with the water precinct about doing some kind of a loop at the end to facilitate flow, so that still needs to be sort of ironed out with them. Sewer is going to connect up to a municipal sewer manhole up here on the top of the page. The manhole is uniquely shallow. It's only about 3 feet deep. So we're still working through some logistics of how we're going to get there. We are most likely going to need to put in a sewer pump station on our property that will go through a force main and deliver it to that catch basin. If we do in fact build a sewer pump station, we will also put a generator. And that generator would probably be located close to the building here. We've had ongoing discussions as this team as to what other generators may be on site. And admittedly, the site planning gets out ahead of some of Matt's other engineering disciplines, mechanical engineering, electrical and plumbing, excuse me. So he's reached out to them and we're trying to figure out. So I think hopefully by the time we submit final, we'll have a better answer if there's going to be generators for the buildings. But right now, at a minimum, there will be a generator for the pump station. I know that was an open question the board had for us last meeting. The next slide. So we also have a landscaping plan, and this is hot off the press. This was not in the packets you received. I just got this updated plan from my landscape architect today. But it does have detailed plantings and a planting list. So we will continue to update this and have this as part of our final site plan package. Adam, could you go to the next slide, please? So just to give you a little preview of the audience, what a landscape plan entails. So it has, I think we have about 12 new trees going in. We're preserving quite a few trees where we can. And then there are plantings around each building and within the islands on the parking lot. So the landscape plan, like I said, will have a detailed planting schedule. That's the type, the size it needs to be when it's installed, and all of those features. Next slide, please. Oh, this is just a little bit more of for the audience, a more zoomed in view. The other thing we've been working on is a lighting plan. We are proposing to have bollard lighting along the sidewalks, and then there'll be some pole lights along the driveway and within the landscape islands in the parking lot. So this plan that's before you, I know it looks a little bit interesting and hard to read. These little bubbles basically are, the lighting consultant can show where those light levels are going to go to and then when they're going to fall down to 0. So this pink pattern is a series of numbers, and what that demonstrates is the lighting plan will not cast light beyond the limits of our area of development even, definitely not off the property line. So when you look at this up close, these have all gone to 0. So we're basically providing just enough light for safety, but with the awareness that we don't want to light up the neighborhood. We certainly don't want to light up the night sky, and we don't want to disturb the neighbors. So this lighting plan will continue to be updated if we make any site changes, but that also is hot off the press and came into our office today. Adam, next slide, please. So this is the lighting schedule that will be on there, and it just shows the height of the poles. They're all 18 feet. They're all LED lights, which is really nice because it allows them to make sure that they point where you want them. We no longer have that big issue of trespass and having to put shields. They're highly controllable by the property management company, even from a cell phone. So we'll have a lot of control over lighting levels once they're installed even. Wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of the truck turning templates and ask for your consideration of an additional waiver. So it wasn't clear to us if the cul-de-sac needed to be built to the town road standard, but that's what we've shown. So that cul-de-sac is rather large. It's 50 feet to the center of the road. So it's a 20-foot wide road. It's about 40 feet to the inside and 60 feet to the outside. It does comply with the road standards, and it works for the fire truck, it works for the school bus, and it works for the garbage truck. So we have those in our site plan package that we submitted. Next slide, please. What we've also done is taken a look at what is the specific fire truck that you have here in New London. So we ran a turning template, a minimum radius, like what would we need as a minimum to allow the school bus, the garbage truck, and the fire truck to circulate through the site. And both the bus and the fire truck can adequately circulate if the center line is 35 feet. So what we're proposing is to reduce the size of the cul-de-sac to a minimum that's acceptable to the fire department. We want to make sure they're comfortable that the turning templates that we're showing are consistent with their fire truck and that they would be able to circulate through the site. What this would do would be it would save site work, it would save impervious area, and it would create a nice little area in the middle to do our bioretention. So I think we would be aiming to reduce it to somewhere between 35 and 40, where 50 is a full road. It would still be as you can see, I don't know if the colors are showing up, see inside here, that's actually the area, that's the radius that a truck needs to turn. So you can see that ours is quite large. So we would like to either go to the minimum or somewhere in between, but certainly anything that we could do to reduce unnecessary impervious, we'd like to do. Next slide, please. I already spoke about this. This is the official waiver to ask you to allow us to reduce the number of parking spaces to 94 based on a 1.5 space per unit, 8 of which would be ADA. And Adam, the last slide, I believe, is the parking space dimensions. We talked about this in October, but I'll refresh your memory as to what we're asking for. So your ordinance doesn't have one specific dimension, it's dependent upon the aisle width, but they're all fairly robust. So, for example, a 24-foot aisle width would require parking spaces that are 10 by 20. We typically see in a lot of the neighboring communities, including your neighbors to the north in Hanover and Lebanon, that the parking spaces are a little bit smaller. Rather than adding compact spaces, we'd like to keep all the spaces the same, but request that they be a little bit smaller. Compact spaces can be problematic, especially if you have a large vehicle parking in a space that's only 15 feet, which is great for a Prius, but not great for a full-size SUV or pickup truck. So we hope you would consider our request to have our parking spaces be 9 by 18 with a 24-foot aisle. That was one of the reasons we submitted the fire truck turning template. Even if cars are parked in all the stalls, that truck can still adequately circulate through those parking lots as they would be required to do in an emergency. Lastly, when we were here in October, we had just received, I believe, the traffic memo, or maybe we just received traffic counts. But I wanted to share with you the findings of their analysis. They concluded, I say they, I should list their name, I apologize. The Wall Consultant Group, make sure I get it right. Their analysis determined that this project would yield approximately 460 daily trips. And what's really important is to look at the peak AM and the peak PM as they enter out onto or come from County Road. So they estimate 24 morning peak trips and 31 PM peak trips. And I will just share, because I don't have it memorized, their findings. They've concluded, and I'll read right from their report, based on the analysis conducted for this report, the proposed project is not expected to impact the condition or capacity of the affected roads and associated infrastructure. So if you have any questions on that or the site plan, I'd be happy to answer them.
So the updates from the department heads, the police, fire, and public works don't have any new specific concerns. They are supportive of the direction that the project is headed, but I do think that they would like to have your design team and us all sit down and we can sort of work our way through some of those conversations about the turning radius. I think that there's probably something in between that they can be comfortable with. I think they just would like to have those conversations in person, but they can appreciate the desire to sort of reduce the overall cost, but also the overall environmental impacts of the additional impervious area. So we can schedule that sometime between now and whenever it is you plan to submit for final review, so that we can hopefully get that sort of worked out before the final. And then I also spoke with the water precinct employee today, Rob Thorpe, just to get his update. And I think there are some water precinct folks here. Maybe they have something they want to add. But in general, he just wanted me to relay that they look forward to seeing the technical drawings and continuing to work on things. And so, reach out to them when you have those drawings ready to be reviewed. And I think.
David, you had a question?
David Royal. I also serve on the Emergency Management Committee. we would strongly recommend that you have generators for those 4 buildings. Right now, if there was a disaster in this town, we have accommodations for 100 people in a shelter. You're adding 60 units. I would hope that maybe that you would cover your own generators for those people, and they wouldn't have to depend on the town for any shelter that they might need. So I would like to urge you to recommend that.
And I believe, Andrew, Lou Boda, our emergency management director, has been in touch with someone at some point, right? He thinks that there may be some grants that he could help to facilitate for generators.
That's correct. Obviously, he mentioned that in October, at the meeting in October, and we subsequently had a conversation. That's something we're looking at, particularly, as mentioned, we know we're going to likely face the need for a generator for the pump station, or the lift station, and that, if we put it there, that makes it very easy to put it into the building next door, but we'll take a look at potentially adding it and talk further with Lou. Thank you.
We actually, David, sorry. Joe, you had a question?
Yeah, I think, could you talk about, again, how the distance between the last building to the Frenwood side, and what the distance is to the lot line? And is there any plan for any extra landscaping in that area to kind of create a green wall or anything?
Sure. I updated those just this afternoon. Adam, could you flip to maybe the site plan? Thank you. Up maybe, oh, actually, either one.
This one?
Yeah, that's fine. So building 2 is the one that is located in the upper left-hand corner. And that building corner is 112 feet from the west property line, which is shared with the Fenwood community. Building 3 is located building 3 is in the lower left corner, and that is 250 feet from the west property line. The parking is about 150 feet. So one thing that I forgot to add is that we're not taking away any of the wooded vegetative buffer that currently exists. So the good thing is that a buffer that you see today, which has a lot of evergreens in it, is going to remain unchanged, and we're 112 to 150 feet from that with our house and closest parking. We don't have any current plans to enhance that. It's pretty robust right now, but certainly, if there were a spot that needed it, we're on board with planting additional evergreen vegetation. Would be a great way for us to provide a year-round screen there.
Thank you, Anna. I have a question. I'm Mary Ann McEnroe, and I'm wondering if you could explain to us, and for the benefit of the people who are here for the meeting, a little bit more about the traffic study. Is it based on the 1.5 parking spaces per unit? And exactly how does that interact with, tell us a little bit more about the traffic study, if you wouldn't mind, please.
I will do my best, but I am admittedly a civil engineer and not a traffic engineer. So really all I can do is share what I've read from their memo. It's not related to parking, so it would not have any bearing on the number of parking spaces. So we've proposed what we feel we need, but this is truly traffic that's generated based on, they use ITE, International Traffic Engineering Standards, so this is all published data that they look at the use and the size of the use, and then they extrapolate, as Adam is showing you on the screen, and I can't read it, I apologize. So for a multifamily, these would be the trips that they would expect perfect, thank you very much. So this is published data. So for a 60-unit development, such as we are proposing, they estimate that 8 cars will be entering at the peak hour and 18 will be exiting. So they combine those for a total of 24. Same thing at the peak hour in the evening, and then they extrapolate that out over a day to give you the estimated daily trips. So they're saying that they think, or that the data is showing or predicting that there'll be 460 additional trips. And then they look at the level of service of the road to make their informed professional decision or recommendation if this is going to impact that. And they have indicated that it would not, based on their expertise.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
I think you are aware, and we discussed in previous meetings, that there is a retirement community that's being, hopefully will see the light of day by maybe fall of '24, I think. And has any of that construction and the possibility of traffic in that area been, is that factored into
It
your
is.
traffic study?
Yep, so there's a paragraph at the end of page 3 that talks about the combined impact of the proposed Long Meadow Commons and New London Place. And they indicate, I'll paraphrase, updated trip duration. The combined total number of trips from both projects at Long Meadow Commons driveway is also well below the NHDOT guideline to merit a full traffic study. So they do go into a bit of an analysis to look at the two and have continued to conclude it doesn't have. So that, I would defer you to that paragraph.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. No, I'm sorry. They've concluded that it doesn't change their assessment, but they have looked at it and its impact. And our project is not adding to or changing that. Our 460 daily trips, or more importantly, the peak trips, are not having a detrimental impact.
One more follow-up question. What is the tipping point in terms of additional construction or perhaps an expansion of the hospital or anything that's down the road? Do they indicate at what point it would have an impact, or a certain number more trips would have an impact on the area accessibility?
They do not give that number specifically. I would say that their analysis goes into further detail because it looked at how many, let me just read it so I don't misspeak. New London Place is a permitted but not yet constructed continuing care retirement community to be located south and east of New London Hospital. It will have an access on County Road and on Parkside Road. The traffic study for the New London Place project, dated July 2nd of 2018, indicated that 10% of trips associated with the project were anticipated to travel to or from New London Place via County Road to the north. So I would say I don't know what a tipping point would be. They would have to get new data, a new projection from the project, whether it was an expansion of the hospital or if, New London Place's traffic engineer reevaluated how much traffic would be going in this direction. I certainly could ask them what that would be, but I don't have that information.
I have a question in regards to the floor plans. So you get a break. It's a quick question. I thought during your presentation, you said that there was no need to go between floors for common uses.
Yep.
Such as storage or laundry. I just don't see laundry on the second floor, or am I missing it?
So over there on the right, sorry, it's been a little while since I've looked at this plan.
Is it this? No, it says janitor closet.
You might have found my lapse of judgment here, so I think perhaps we were just having the...
You have laundry on the first floor, so somebody on the second floor would have to go first.
Yes, sorry about that. I think we had rearranged these floor plans and tried to compact the floor plans, so we lost our second floor laundry room.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm just curious, the connection, the pedestrian connection that leads to the back of the Hannaford's Plaza, has there been any coordination or conversation with the property owner there just to sort of figure out what the receiving end of that sidewalk may be?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. We, in an effort to reduce the impervious surface here, but while maintaining pedestrian access, we had originally looked at a sidewalk in this area and one in this area, while at the same time adding a clearer pedestrian access along the front to County Road. in trying to reduce it, we said, well, okay, do we need all three? And ultimately went with the middle location. However, we've been having conversations with the folks at Crosspoint, the owners of the plaza, and they have indicated a preference for actually bringing it to this point, so up over by the entrance to Hannaford. So we, with final submission, we would be removing this location and adding this location. I think their concerns, as I understand it, were around by bringing pedestrians sort of to the middle of the plaza at the rear. That's closer to the loading area there for the Hannafords. There might be some traffic, pedestrian interplay there. Better to have folks coming to the front. There is an existing, for those of you who've not had this opportunity to go there, there's an existing pedestrian path that connects Fenwood to the Hannafords area, right in that proximity, right in here. So this essentially would mirror that for this property. So we've had those conversations. We're continuing to talk about other issues as it affects the boundary line between the two projects. But that's the latest. So that's something that we would tweak from this submission, once approved, to the final submission.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So this is for the board. I think the applicant is going to be looking for some feedback from you all this evening on what third-party reviews you expect to desire for the final site plan, so that we can maybe start to get some of those reviews going in the intervening weeks. So I guess we'd like to hear from some of you on that. I think the typical for a project like this would be for Underwood engineers who serve as the town's sewer department consultants. They would typically do a third-party review, whether or not you'd like a civil third-party review, and then whether or not you would like a third party for the traffic report. So I think those are sort of the three usual suspects when it comes to third party. So sort of would like to hear some of the feedback from members on that.
Before we get there, could you possibly address what your anticipated second phase, when that might start? I understood that it is pretty much dependent on fundraising and that sort of thing. Do you have a sense of when that might be? The reason why I'm asking is I'm wondering, what the elapsed time might be from the very beginning to the end of the project.
I think the short answer is as quickly and as briefly as possible. Ideally, we'd like to try to get that figured out ASAP, so that we're able to move all of it forward simultaneously. We have heard, in talking with folks in the community about the importance of the barn structure. We want to preserve that structure and enhance it as an asset. So that's something that ideally we'd try to be moving forward at the same time. But it may be separately financed. That's all.
And the length of time for the building of the first project?
Yeah. So we are the typical construction schedule for a project of this size and complexity would be 12 months. However, we are investigating modular construction as part of that process. The benefit of modular is that it would potentially shorten the amount of time that we're constructing the project. Actually, I'm meeting with folks tomorrow, so we'll have more information for you going forward on that exact timetable, but ideally, the longest would be 12 months.
And assuming you get approval after consulting with getting their buy-in, the department heads and any civil review and engineering review or anything like that, when do you anticipate or when are you hopeful to start the project?
Sure. So at this point, we are hoping that with the board's reviews over the next several months, we'd be going in for a financing both in the spring. There's a summer piece, application piece that's due in July, and then potentially looking at a fall construction start
Of 23.
of 23.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to underscore the importance for an analysis by the Water and Sewer Commission. That's something that needs to be completed by an independent person.
Yep, so we agree, and we're anxious to get our plans into the water precinct. We are finalizing this design, and they didn't want us, we submit the application and they review it for two things. They review it both for the design, and it goes out to Underwood. They also do the water precincts review, as well as capacity. So our goal is to, in the next month, as we're getting our plans from this preliminary stage to final, our goal is to submit back to the town final site plan approval on February 7th. And we would expect that as soon as we have the water piece, to a point where we can finalize the plan and profiles, we will get that application over to the water precinct. So we hope to have been before them at least once before we come back to the board at the end of February. And my understanding with the sewer is that our site plan submission to you gets gets moved along to the sewer commission and/or the review engineer. So we haven't done anything with that, but we do look forward to that review as well.
Thank you.
I think, to Paul's point, the water precinct has the third-party review already, so tying that in, because it's the same engineer for sewer as an additional third-party review makes sense. I also think a third-party review on traffic is warranted. It's sort of the hub of, or maybe the second hub of traffic in New London. So I would think that is worthy of looking at. I don't think that a civil is required, as the project is large enough that it requires an AOT, which is it's even more stringent than the requirements placed on shoreland. So the requirements on civil, basically site development, stormwater management are already higher, so I think it would be burdensome to add technically a third-party review on that. Those are just my thoughts.
I'm curious, when would you start screening people to move in? And do you anticipate any problem filling?
Typically, we start screening folks about 3 to 4 months in advance of the property being delivered. So if we were starting in September, let's say, of this year, and we were going 12 months out, we'd be looking to start screening people late spring, really late. We'd probably be starting to screen them in June for a September occupancy. Part of it is the units here. One of the primary programs we're using to finance it is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, as previously mentioned, and part of that is income qualifying people, and before they move in, and you have to have current information. If you go more than 90 days, it's stale for the purposes of the program, so we don't want stale information on people's finances, which forms the basis for seeing whether they qualify. So therefore, we'll start the advertising process, getting people in the queue, but then we start processing applications when we're within that 90-day window. You're welcome.
Okay, are there members from the public who have questions or comments? If you do, can you please come to the front and introduce yourself?
It's Green. I'm John Ellis. I did have a couple questions. One was, how will you deal with a working couple that comes in with one car? And because you have 1.5 parking spaces, and will that restrict them from you renting to them? Also, what about handicap? What if there's a handicap worker who is working, but what provisions have you made for handicapped individuals that hopefully you would rent to? And then what is the current, in the traffic study that you quoted, what's the current traffic pattern there, and how will that affect the citizens that are not living in the area when they need emergency services to exit, or the fire department needs to obviously get in to save the lives of, hopefully that won't happen, but what provisions have been made for that? So what's the current traffic flow there, and will it require a signal light to be installed there also for that purpose, to get the trucks in and out? And I'm talking about the hospital trucks. And then I was wondering, what are the expected rental fees for a single, I think you said a single apartment and a single bedroom and a double bedroom? What's the range that we could expect to pay to rent there for workers? So based on what you've said, those are my concerns. And then it's minor, but you had mentioned there's a mail room, I believe, in the gray part of the building around the circle, a mailbox room, but I also thought I heard you say there's also a mail room in the barn. Why do you have 2 mail rooms, or whatever that is? So, you want me to sit and then?
Yeah, they can answer then.
Let them answer.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
All right, we're gonna divide this up a little bit, and please let us know if we've missed any of your questions. So in terms of accommodating folks who are disabled, there are 88 parking spaces located proximate to each building, as well as to the future community building. And I will let Matt speak to the ADA accessibility within the buildings. Regarding the traffic study does not look at emergency vehicle response times. It basically takes a look at what this project is expected to generate, and it did look at County Road in the sense that it they quote the New Hampshire DOT spot count, so it's something that DOT records on County Road south of Forest Acres Road, estimated a motor vehicle average daily traffic volume of 1,554 vehicles per day for 2001. And the 2020 count, I don't exactly understand what that's saying. So basically, they did look at what the current level of service is on County Road. Let me just share this paragraph because I think it's more helpful for me to read than try to explain. New Hampshire DOT guidelines specify that a traffic study should be considered if the proposed development will generate 100 or more peak hour trips. We have 24 in the AM and 31 in the evening. The base vehicle trip generation is estimated at less than 1/3 of the threshold, therefore with reductions associated with active travel modes. The estimated trip generation is likely to be negligible within the overall road network, and this project is not expected to impact roadway capacity or result in any unreasonable congestion. So to answer the question, there are no traffic lights or anything proposed because they've concluded that the threshold is below what they would expect to have an impact on the road.
All right, so I'll talk on the ADA accessibility as well as the mailrooms. So for ADA, as Aaron mentioned, it's a fully accessible site, so you get to be able to park right in front of the building. You've got the best parking spot on the site. In order to get from the car to the building, there'll be no steps. So there'll be truncated domes, there'll be breaks in the sidewalks, there'll be no stairs to get into the lobby. The current building codes and accessibility codes are very friendly to people with disabilities. So in this particular project, every building will have one fully ADA accessible apartment. And then the rest of the units will be split between Type A and Type B units. And without getting into the literal nuts and bolts of that, all of the first floor apartments will be Type A. And that's almost if you took a fully ADA accessible and a completely non-accessible apartment and kind of mixed them together. So what that means is at every plumbing fixture, at every door, you have increased accessibility clearances. All the door hardware will be ADA accessible, for example. You won't have any narrow doors that a wheelchair can't fit in. Your showers, your toilets will be a lot easier to use in a Type A. And it would still be you could still use it if you're in a wheelchair, but it wouldn't be preferred. A fully ADA unit is what you might see like in a commercial building where you go into the bathroom and it's a huge bathroom, your toilet has nothing around it, your sinks you can pull in underneath the sinks, both in the bathroom and the kitchen. The Type A's allow you to put cabinets underneath the sinks, for example, and you still have a decent amount of clearances around the toilets, but it's a little bit less. And then upstairs where it'd be impossible for a wheelchair to get to, those would be the Type Bs. But those are actually surprisingly friendly as well. So for example, if you're on crutches, those units are very much accessible to you. And as far as the future phase barn, that would be a fully ADA accessible building. So if you're outside, you can get inside again without having to go up any stairs. It'd be via a ramp or just be at grade. Trying to think, even the pavilion and the playground would be ADA accessible. So you'd be able to physically wheel up onto the pavilion, and all these playgrounds now have accessible features for children with disabilities. So I think that's probably an over answer to your question. And as far as the mailroom goes, so because the barn is phase 2, in theory that might mean it might not ever happen, we need to plan for a mailroom somewhere. And kind of some lessons learned with some project with Twin Pines and some other multifamily is theft is an issue. And in these unguarded mailroom areas, sometimes these packages grow feet and disappear. And so in the ideal situation, in the barn, there would be an office, and that office would overlook the mailroom. So it'd be a much more secure space. But until that happens, each building will have their own area for mail and packages. So just be a little bit more compact and less secure.
And we did verify with the post office here in New London that having mail delivery to each of the buildings is acceptable. So just to put a fine point on that. There was a question around, lastly, the rents. While we haven't set the final rents, you would expect to see around $1,500 for a one-bedroom, $1,800 for a two-bedroom. That rent is all-inclusive. Most folks pay rent, and then they may be paying utilities on top of it. That's not the model that we have. So the rent includes heat, hot water, electric. So it's including everything, but if you decide to get cable or telephone, landline, that would be extra, but everything else is included. So it's a little bit different pricing model than folks might be used to. And again, that's currently projected. That may change slightly, but not significantly.
I think there was one piece I failed to mention, which was a question: if you have a couple that moves in with 2 cars, how are we accounting for that when we're providing 1.5 per unit? We have 60 units, 40 of which are 1-bedroom, and 20 of which are proposed to be 2-bedroom. And so we feel that we will not have everybody having 2 cars, and Twin Pines has experience with that on some of the other properties that they have built and are currently managing. So we do anticipate that we will have a number of singles who only have one car, and that will adequately even out or balance out, if you will. And that's one of the other reasons the parking lots are sort of strategically placed around the site, so that, if for some reason one lot is full, the others are not too far away.
Thank you.
Good evening. Russ Moore from the Bike Walk Coalition. I just wanted to commend the project. Obviously, a lot of deep thinking went into this, and it provides ready access to downtown, and also it provides residents that have more diverse income base to enjoy our beautiful town. The first thing I wanted to say is in regard to the sidewalks, and I hope I'm clear about this, but with Continuum, I believe there's a commitment to do a sidewalk from their entrance on Parkside Drive to the corner of County Road. There's also a commitment from this project to do a segment of sidewalk. I think it would be ideal to have a contiguous sidewalk that actually went from Parkside Drive up County Road to the Rotary, to the shopping center. And I believe that right now, there would be just some small segments that are not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's some small segments in front of the hospital that would not be completed based on these two developments. And I would just encourage the town and the developers to think that through carefully, because I think with the increased density of this area, with the staff from the hospital, the residents of Continuum, the staff of Continuum, the residents of this new development, we really need to think carefully about pedestrian access, pedestrian safety, and I also hope that there'll be some consideration in terms of bicycling in the area. I hope that the development will have a bike rack, will encourage residents to engage in active transportation, and the time to be thinking about this at this very preliminary, this is the time to be thinking about these considerations at an early stage in the project. And I know there is funding for these types of projects, both privately, federal, and state, and I think that it would be a great service to the residents of our town to be giving this some very serious consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Yeah, Russ and I have had a chance to talk a little bit about this, and one of the, and as I have had with Adam around, there is some federal funding that is currently available through the state of New Hampshire Invest New Hampshire program. The state is making available up to $10,000 per unit. So a project of this size, 60 units, that would be up to $600,000. It's a competitive process. It is time sensitive, but that is a great, if this project were permitted, that is a great program to be going after that funding, which could be utilized as a potential either match or source in entirety for a sidewalk project, the kind of which Russ was mentioning. And I do think, as we talked about at the last hearing, there is the current configuration up there. There is a sidewalk that runs to the hospital on the hospital side, and then terminates at the first driveway further to the north up County Road. So there's a relatively small stretch to bring it down, and that's something that we would love to work with both the hospital and the town on trying to make happen. Thank you.
Jamie?
Hi, do I need to push the button? I guess not. Thanks. Hi, I'm Jamie Hess. I chair the Energy Committee, but this evening I'm speaking as a private citizen. First of all, I want to applaud Twin Pines and the Planning Board for getting the project this far along. I think it's really exciting. I want to see this project built. However, I want to call your attention to one fact that may have been overlooked, and that is that the site of Long Meadow Commons is designated as prime agricultural soil, and until recently it was used by Spring Ledge Farm to grow the sweet corn that we all love in the summer. To quote from the New London Master Plan approved in 2021, preserving and conserving agricultural land and soil is important to the town's resiliency. This has become increasingly apparent with the pandemic and interruptions to the food supply chain. New London is fortunate to have significant holdings of land with soils that have important value for agricultural use. Survey respondents and attendees at community forums stated a strong desire for the town to take steps to preserve these lands for agricultural uses. Based on the interest shown, the Planning Board and other town boards and committees may explore steps that could result in such land remaining in agricultural use as opposed to residential development. And then there are 3 bullet point recommendations. Number 1, identify land with valuable agricultural soils that is appropriate for preservation. Number 2, explore ways to encourage public or private preservation of such land. And number 3, explore zoning or other regulatory steps intended to retain such land available for agriculture. So again, I don't want to throw a wrench in the works, and I don't want to see us create a zero-sum game where a win for workforce housing is a loss for agriculture or vice versa. What I'm wondering is if we can put our heads together and come up with a scenario that's a win for workforce housing and a win for agriculture. Now, I noticed looking at this parcel, it's a 40-acre parcel, and Twin Pines only proposes to use, I believe, 6 or 7 of those acres. Of the 40 acres, 10 of them are designated as farmland on the Avatar property card. And so let's see if we can come up with a plan where we use 6 or 7 acres for workforce housing and preserve the other 3 or 4 acres for agriculture. Because once agricultural land is gone, it's gone forever. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments from the public? Want to come up?
Thank you. My name is Peter Nichols. I'm the current chair of the Housing Commission in New London and also a resident Porcupine Ridge. I'm speaking in a capacity as the chairman just briefly to provide some clarity, and then I want to make a few quick comments on a personal level. The Housing Commission, on their behalf, I'd like to speak in general support of affordable housing developments in New London that meet the statutory standards of workforce housing, including this project proposed by Twin Pines Housing Trust. This is not a specific endorsement of any one project because the Housing Commission is a land use board that serves to advise the Planning Board on development regulations related to equitable housing in New London and is not a regulatory authority. That's the job of the Planning Board, and you do it well. But I must be clear on a point where there has been some confusion. This is not a project proposed by the Housing Commission. I know that there have been hearings where zoning recommendations have been held the same time as the Housing Trust as a Twin Pines project, and it's not anything to do with the Housing Commission. We didn't bring Twin Pines Housing Trust to New London except to speak on a panel, which was very informative generally. This project provides badly needed affordable housing that in large part meets the definition of workforce housing, but seeks to conform with New London zoning requirements as of right, and not under the current workforce housing bylaw, for which amendments are proposed for discussion later tonight. Important to make that distinction. On a personal level, I think you may know I'm a commercial real estate developer and advisor, fully retired now. And I want to, on a personal level, endorse this project wholeheartedly. It's rare that you see a developer of this caliber and this quality working so hard in small towns in earnest, addressing issues. I think it's met with great success, and I hope it's approved. But I want you to know on a personal level, not as a member of the Housing Commission, I endorse this project and I'd like to see it built. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Michael?
Thank you. Michael Todd. I'm the town moderator and also the current acting chair of the ZBA, but I come to you tonight as a citizen of the town and to ask some questions of our developers here. I think I read earlier, thank you. I think I read earlier that the purchase of this land included the reservation of a life estate for Mr. Crescenti. Isn't it not correct?
He has a limited time to remain there in his home.
And in any event, now I understand that the present plan is to raise the house. Is that correct? Because it's in the way?
Yes.
And this house, you've had it inspected, did you not? The certain historical preservation character went and looked at the house, and they determined that it was built in, what was their guess, 1780, 1790?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you guys share the, I'm sorry, Andrew, to interrupt. Can you guys share the mic just so everybody can hear?
Sure. Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, we had a historic consultant work with the State of New Hampshire Division of Historic Resources to look at the quality of the buildings, and ultimately the building has been significantly altered over the years and introduced a number of very 20th century materials, and as such, it was not deemed historic, worthy of protection that they would normally, look for.
Had you considered moving it out of the way?
Happy to make it available to you for a very inexpensive price. I say that only slightly in jest. That's something that we have looked at in other situations where there is somebody who expresses an interest in a building. If there's a way to move it, preserve it, we'd be happy to work with somebody if there was somebody who expressed an interest.
I just make this observation for the board that in the last several years, we have lost certain, what I think of as architectural icons in town. I would include the Jacobson House on Burpee Hill in that category. I would include the Highland House at the junction of County Road and Little Sunapee. And I would also include the Betty Nichols House, whose front door appears in J. Dwayne Squire's treatise as an example of colonial architecture in London. Gone, went into a dumpster. So I would just caution the board, to the extent that we can without a demolition ordinance, to try to work with the developers to the extent that we can probably partially maybe save some of this historic architecture before it's gone. And it would also be nice to make sure that our native son, Jimmy Crescenti, has someplace to live when this is all over. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Comments, questions?
I have a question for you guys about, this is a project that's going to be around for 15, 20, 25, 30 years. So is there any plans to put any electric vehicle charging stations in the project?
The short answer is yes. With every project that we're doing now, we're installing conduit so that we can make that possible. And where there are grants and other funds available, we're going after that. To the extent that we can include it right up front, we'll do that. That's something that we're doing throughout our portfolio with every other project that we're undertaking this year.
I'm Emerson Colby, and I'm a citizen of the town. I'm a retired veterinarian, and I spent about 30 years in Hanover. I am not against workforce housing, but I think you as a board have a lot on your plate. Is this the way New London is going to look for the next 50, 60, or 100 years? I'm not in favor of the traffic statement that was made here this evening. This is New London, not some other place. And if you have done what I have done, and I'm sure you have, over the years, you've parked in front of the post office and watched the way people park. And so some lot that is 24 feet deep does not hold today's pickup truck, especially if it has bumpers on the front and trailer hitches on the back. And only if you park between the lines. You're dealing with people that are probably an average age of late 60s right now. That's changing. You have some choices to make relative to additional housing in this town. How you do it is going to determine what's going on in the future in the town. One thing that has bothered me is that I have not seen or heard anything from the Mary Hitchcock Memorial Hospital. They make use of the program here in the hospital that we service as a town. And I'm not sure that we've done it correctly if we haven't gone to the Hitchcock and said, what are your plans for the New London Hospital? There's a lot going on in medicine these days, and if you don't believe me, take a look at COVID and see where it came from, how it got here, and who's using it. And the Mary Hitchcock and medicine in general needs to be considered, because if we're going to expand the hospital, and that subject was broached this evening, if that program does expand, what effect is it going to have on Long Meadow Commons and the traffic program? So I think you need to consider this. The other thing that got to me was in the last two issues, or thereabouts, of the Intertown Record, there was a comment on the sewer program in Sunapee. For those of you who do not know, you should look and perhaps see where the sewerage goes. Some of our sewerage goes to Sunapee. Are they qualified? Have they been contacted? Are they ready to receive something from 60 additional apartments? And the drainage for the sewerage is also of importance. Drainage it runs off. It doesn't always stay in one place as you'd like it to, even though attempts have been made to control it in this program. Nobody has talked about a police department, but we're also planning to move the police department. And the fire department, those of us who have been around have talked to firemen and people. There's no substation. When you start talking about those kinds of things, you affect the citizenry of New London and its tax base. What effect is all of this going to have on the tax base of New London? There is a statement that Twin Pines made relative to taxes, but it's very brief. You're talking about all the citizens of this town who are going to be involved in Long Meadow Commons, and yet who's paying the bills? And what are the long-term effects of all of this? We're talking about tomorrow and the building of this and starting before this year, this calendar year is really over. And that it's needed, there's no question about that. However, what is the long-term effect of all of this going to be on the taxpayer in New London? Where are we going to put the police department? If you don't want to have your mail delivered to Long Meadow Commons and you want something at the post office, it's your choice. Can the post office handle 25 or 30 more people? There's a lot that has to be done. The parking is a problem. I think the medical aspects need to be considered by you. Somebody from the Mary Hitchcock needs to be contacted. The way medicine has looked in this state in the last 20 years, it's changing. The world is very, very small, medically speaking. So I would urge you, and I'll leave you some paperwork before I leave, I would urge you to consider these, contact the town of Sunapee and see, can they accept 60 more apartments added to the sewer line, or how much of it goes? The water is quite adequate, but it's got to be dug up. If changes are made during that time, and remember that the hospital is at the crest of a hill. It's a blind crest when you come up over that hill. If you're going to move the rotary and have part of a traffic study, is that considered? If you come up over the hill, there's no sidewalk. People who smoke from the hospital are walking down there. They're in the way sometimes. There's a lot of dog walking. And people in this community are not young anymore. So I would urge you to look ahead and see what you're doing for the town of New London for the next 25 to 100 years or more. I think we need it. Is this it? If this is it, there will be more. There already is more. It's being built as we speak. There's a CCRC plan for Parkside Road. What is all that traffic going to do? How are they going to get there? Is the hospital big enough to contain it? Can we provide medical services? Do we have the sewer capability? They are all serious questions that need to be asked, plus the fact you need to consider that what effect is this going to have on the taxpayer? If you need a substation for a fire truck, that's not only the fire truck, it's somebody to drive it and move it. Do we need to hire additional people to provide town services? Are they all part of the plan? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the comments. On the sewer capacity, so in the third-party review that we were discussing, that is one of the components that that Underwood Engineers does look at. And I think I saw one of our selectmen come in who serve as our sewer commissioners, so he can can jump in if I say anything wrong. But my understanding is that the capacity is fairly substantial in Sunapee, and that the most intent part of a third-party review would be the actual infrastructure needed to be tied into the system. However, with a third-party review, the entire capacity and infrastructure would be looked at. And the same would happen with the water department. Obviously, they're a separate entity, so they do that part on their own. And then I don't know if, I know Tom Mannion is here. I don't know if he wants to respond to the hospital questions.
Happy to. Tom Mannion, President and CEO of New London Hospital, and Emerson and I know each other well. On this point, by statute, we are a critical access hospital, which means we cannot exceed a 25-bed limitation, so we have no plans to grow beyond the 25 beds that we have. I think operationally, though, of course, there'll be things that we look at over the years that we'll continue to look at to figure out what the next best thing is. I have nothing in the works today as to what that looks like. We are financially healthy. From the last couple years, we've made very healthy margins in our organization. Our biggest issue is recruiting primary care providers. One of the biggest reasons behind that is when we have primary care providers come to our clinics when they interview, and we have several, we have 2 coming up this week, in fact, they often see that we don't have any medical assistants to help facilitate rooming in that office. They themselves have to room often their own patients, which this facility would help us to attract some of those frontline folks who would fill these roles, because otherwise they're traveling 30, 40, 60 minutes to get here to work. So this project in and of itself, I think I testified last time that we have like 40 or so openings that would very easily fit this, what Mr. Winters and his team is proposing, and 285 of our current positions would also qualify for this facility as it stands today. So we have needs for staffing, which would lend to our need to fill our primary care positions, which would accommodate some of the growth that we're talking about here. So they do stack one on top of the other. We have no other plans. I think we only have a couple of parcels of acreage left after assuming everything continues to move forward, which for all intents and purposes it is for our New London Place partnership with Continuum. But after that land is conveyed, we will not have much more to build on, and so we don't really have a whole lot of plans to build and expand anytime soon. But we do need to recruit for primary care providers, of which we have vacancies, which would care for this community. And for reference, a primary care, a single physician has a patient panel somewhere, depending on the situation, between, let's say, 1,100 to 1,600 patients. So that's about the size of a single primary care provider fully full with their patients. So again, the 60 or so folks we're talking about here, we will be able to absorb if we can staff our current vacancies. Thank you.
So I'd like to hear from the board now in terms of kind of your thoughts on, we talked a little bit about third party and review, and we also would be nice to get a general idea on waivers as well. So I don't know if people have thoughts. Paul? I think he's got it for now.
Just started off, I think Jeremy helped me understand, his comments helped me understand the waivers and the things that might be needed, and I would endorse that. And I think in terms of, the parking waiver, I was very convinced that the extended discussion we had sometime in the fall about that and what the observations have been, and I think that I think I would be in favor of that. And there was another, the fire truck thing. I think I would rely on the fire trucks, on the guys that drive those and the chief to advise us on that.
Thanks, Paul.
I agree with Paul on the parking spaces, also on the deferral of 3 spaces. I think that was the additional waiver request. So it was, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the size of the unit, the size of the parking spaces, the quantity of parking spaces, and the deferral of spaces, so 3 waivers. on parking, and then the other was the turn radius.
Correct.
So I agree with Paul that the people that are handling the heavy equipment, the buses and the fire trucks, would weigh in on that. But other than that, the savings and impermeable area and the reduction in required stormwater controls, I think, is good.
Yeah, sorry.
I agree. I have no qualifications to judge anything having to do with the heavy equipment and turning radius with the cul-de-sacs and whatever. And Jay is really very involved. He's been consulted, and he certainly will not be quiet on this, if you know him at all. I think it's very reasonable to defer 3 of the ADA spaces until the barn renovation occurs. In 2 spaces, excuse me, 2 ADA spaces. And in previous hearings, I've been very pleased to hear about the type A on the first floor and the accommodations that have been considered in the construction of this unit. The number of the parking spaces, again, I'm not a parking space expert. You guys have, Twin Pines and your experience, how many times have you done this development? How many developments have you guys built? Is it like 4, 5, 20?
We have 20 different properties, I would say comparable in size to this. We've got 5 or 6 that are comparable in size
Right.
to this, or larger.
Yes.
We have 120 units.
Yes. And I'd like to think of myself as not naive. I think your best interest is served in calculating an appropriate number of parking spaces. And if we're talking about 94 spaces over, 60 units, gee whiz, that seems like a lot. And, there's going to be, my assumption, just so that everything's transparent, my assumption is there are going to be a number of people who are employed in the town who can walk to work. And boy, what a benefit will that be for them and for the town. They'll just cross the street and go to the hospital, or they'll walk up to Hannaford's, or wherever, there are help wanted signs. I think many people will be able to walk there. So I am not concerned about the parking. And I do understand about the pickup trucks and the winches on the front and the back and, flashing lights and whatever else people decorate their pickup trucks with. We'll have to deal with it. I don't know that there's any accommodation that can be made for it right now, and I don't know that it's necessary. I'm very glad, however, that you raised the issue of that. I'm trying to visualize a pickup truck in some of the spaces. And I really think this is a well-conceived project. It's been vetted by our town, by our residents and the board a number of times, and I think it is in their best interest to listen, which they have, and to do their absolute level best to provide the best quality and the most effective planning and construction that they can. I do endorse a third-party review for all of the reasons that have been discussed. Right.
Not civil, but the other 2.
Right,
Okay.
not civil. I don't think the civil.
Any other comments from the board before we move ahead? Emily?
I would just like to say that I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think if everything goes through with the concerns that we have, then it's a win. It's a win for all of us. It'd be great to see.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to move does that make sense? I'd like to propose a motion to move this from preliminary to
To accept the preliminary application and invite them to file a final application for site plan review when they're ready.
What Adam said.
I second that.
Great, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jeremy. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great.
So
Thanks very much.
So Aaron and Andrew, we can be in touch to schedule with the department heads and to start the third-party process. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with the easy ones, see if we can bust through those.
Yeah.
And literally clear them. Just
All right, folks, we're going to continue our meeting. Thank you for coming for Twin Pines, and for those of you who are staying for the second round, we'll try to move as fast as we can. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to...
Okay, folks, we're going to get started on the next part. Thank you.
So we will start by reviewing the shorter amendments that hopefully are quicker, because I know there's probably going to be a fair amount of discussion on the workforce housing overlay, and I know people are probably eager to get moving since we've been here for a while. So for planning board members and for the public to understand what we're doing tonight and what motions and action will need to be taken, we will move through each one of the amendments. You do have the opportunity to propose changes to the amendments tonight. If there's a change proposed, then that means that we need to schedule a second public hearing, which would be held at our January 25th, or 24th, excuse me, planning board meeting, at which time there's no more opportunity to change things, and you make that decision then whether or not to move it forward to town meeting. However, if you do not wish to change anything from what has been proposed, we have the ability to vote on each one of these amendments independently to move forward to town meeting. So it doesn't mean that they are on the books, it means that we are sending them to the voters to decide the fate of them. So we will jump in with the first amendment that's up here on the screen. Hopefully you can see some of it. But this is an amendment to the sign ordinance. We were approached by the New London Barn Playhouse about a year ago following their construction with request to consider their signage. And as our sign ordinance is written, there are special considerations for the institutional districts that we have, which include the college recreational, the hospital, and the theater district for the Barn Playhouse. Unfortunately, when the theater district was drafted 4 or so years ago, 5 years ago, I think maybe now, this part of the ordinance was not amended to include them, and it was somewhat confusing where it says institutional districts, and it is plural, but then it specifically lists all the districts except for the theater. And so what we are proposing to do is to eliminate the specific references and to simply leave it at institutional districts, inclusive of all of them. And that way, the Barn Playhouse would be offered the same process and additional latitude to the signed ordinance as our other institutional zones. So I guess if there are any board comments or questions, and then any public comments or questions.
Any comments from the board? Anybody? Okay. Public? All right.
Okay, so from the board now, what we would be looking for is a motion to move this amendment forward to town meeting.
So moved.
And yeah, do I need to tell?
Yep, so.
Did you say you need a second? Or?
No, sorry, real quick. Emily, I meant to say as well, can you sit in for Janet tonight? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you, if you don't mind. I'm remiss in saying that. Thank you. So we have a second now. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay, so then not for Janet, for, who else?
No, everyone else is here. Paul came in the, yep, Paul was who we thought.
Never mind, I'm sorry. Good point. Thank you. Yeah. So we need another second then, right? No,
we need a different second.
Different second. Okay, thank you, Joe.
Okay.
So we're good. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
So that was unanimous? Okay, because it goes on the ballot, so we need to keep track here.
Yeah. Yeah, if I miss you, just please holler.
Okay. So the second proposal this evening this is where we were approached with the question of electric vehicle charging stations. And though this is not in the context of your home or residential chargers at your private single-family home or at your apartment house, that would be an accessory use to the, it would be a subordinate use to the primary residential use. This is for electric vehicle charging stations like a gas station that are actually commercially used. And we had an inquiry at one point this year, and we discussed it with town council, and because there was no allowance for it within our zoning ordinance, it was not allowed, and they would be subject to a variance in order to move forward. And so the advice that we received was to consider adding the use approval in the same way that we already allow for filling stations. Unfortunately, the definition for filling stations is tight enough that it is pertains solely to petroleum-based filling stations, and so it didn't allow for electric filling stations to be under that umbrella. And so what we have done here is added as a use permitted by special exception, just as filling stations are use permitted by special exception in the commercial zone. And then in addition to that, we needed a definition, which has been added here as well.
Yep. Right. And the only thing I would propose that we change for the definition, charging stations, centers of doing more the second use of the word stations, where we say more charging stations, we would propose to change that to pedestals to make that a little bit more clear. But that's just the word swap. Are there any comments from the board about this? Or from the public? Bill?
I'd like to know why
Can you come up? I'm sorry, Bill, just so we can hear. I apologize.
I'd like to know why you have 3 or more as opposed to what would happen if I wanted to put 2 pedestals in my gas station? My filling station.
Right. So I think that there's concern that someplace like the hospital or the college may install a couple of accessory charging stations that the general public may actually have access to and be able to utilize their app system to pay for that electricity that they're filling, but that was not intended to be a independent electric vehicle charging station akin to when an entity like Tesla comes in and has, a bankhead of 5, 6 chargers, and it's a standalone facility, that is really the filling station by itself. I do see your point of if an existing gas station that has 4 petroleum pumps wishes to only add 2 electric pumps.
The station in the center of town on Main Street only has 2 petroleum pumps, and it would seem logical that someday they might want to have an electric vehicle pedestals, and it doesn't seem to me anything is lost in the spirit of what we're trying to do here if we have 2 or more rather than 3. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's...
Michael, you had a comment?
I do. And not to be a nitpick, but we attorneys, we're men and women of letters and words. And so with that in mind, I would recommend the following changes in the definition, under definition to add. Electric vehicle charging station facility should be capitalized as it is above. And then after the colon, we should insert electric vehicle charging, small c, charging centers comprised of 3 or more charging stations for the use of the general public. And then that raises the question of whether or not electric vehicle charging stations should be in the definitions. Do we need to add that in our definitions? If we don't have it specifically defined, then we fall back to the common dictionary language, and maybe that's not in the dictionary yet. It's kind of a new item. If there's any ambiguity, we should define it in our own, list it in our own definitions. That's all.
Wait, can you say that again, Michael? I missed that.
Under definitions to add,
right,
we say electric vehicle charging station facility should be capitalized, just as it is in the sentence above.
Sure, yeah.
So for
that I got.
consistency.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
And then we say, after the colon, we put in electric vehicle charging centers comprised of, we're defining what that is. And that is electric vehicle charging stations comprised of 3 or more charging stations for the use of the general public. But then the question is, should we include electric vehicle charging stations in our definitions, so we know exactly what that is, just for clarity?
Yep.
That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Are there other comments from the public?
While we're on that point, I don't have it in front of me, but Adam, you might want to help us out here. Does that mean if I'm a hardware store, I can put 2 out, but I can't put any out?
So if you're a hardware store or any retailer, and you're putting them out to sell that electricity as a commercial, just like a gas pump, I think what I heard was we wanted to drop the number to 2. So if you were to put out 2 or more, then I think that would drop you in under the umbrella of being a charging center.
But you have to apply for that.
Correct, for a special exception.
And if someone puts out 1, do they have to apply, or it's not allowed? I don't want to get too deep in the...
If it's not for the public use, that's the main thing, right?
Speak into your microphone so that everyone hears the...
But it's for public use, essentially, right? So if you're a private business and you have a charging station for your employees, you can talk to this, Jeremy, right? That's different than a facility that's meant to be used by the public for charging up that they would find on one of the apps or something like that to come and charge. Like
I'm just asking the question, if you do that, is that allowed in the commercial zone or wherever your business is?
Mm-hmm. I think if it's, as we've looked at it now and how our attorney discussed it, is that would, less than that would be considered an accessory use to the primary commercial.
Okay. I'm fine with that. I just don't
use.
want to get it.
I do think, and we tossed this around a little bit with the trying to use the designation of the level 1, level 2, or the DC fast charging, and we tried not to use that language in an effort to try not to date our ordinance in a particular technology that exists today, that then we're stuck when level 1 is, obsolete and everyone has a level 2 charger, that we're not sort of stuck in that, that box. But it does create an interesting existence of a single charger for personal or personal employee use versus an open to the public, commercially operating charging facility.
Adam, I don't have it in front of me, but we're altering section, sorry, 7?
7, yes, correct.
Does it somehow specify for profit? I mean, the difference between, nobody puts a gas pump for convenience for their customers on their property, right? I mean, however, it's fairly easy for a business to put a convenience charging station and offer that without charging for it. That's redundant, but, and I've seen it. I mean, even the hospital, you go to DHMC, for example, and they have, courtesy charging stations. Rule out Tesla, but there are courtesy stations. So do we need to specify that these are for profit? For instance, if PCs put one out there and it was just a courtesy charging station, or they put 2 out there, or 3.
Well, I mean, I think that's a question that you need to also have a discussion on of, do you see a difference in the built environment between one tenant or commercial or residential building having 8 chargers versus 8 chargers that are commercial? Do you look at them differently?
Well, I think there would, yeah, that is where I was heading. So, if you think of to sort of single out Tesla, a charging station in a parking lot at like a Hannaford's, you get all the red pedestals with Tesla all over it. However, you look at a parking garage and quite literally there's an EV station that has a discrete plug, and those are convenience. People aren't necessarily being charged for that. So it's
also not the main purpose.
Right. So there's a difference. Right. I'm just wondering if, because we're lumping it into the section that's a petroleum station, is that just assumed that we're talking about somebody that's taking a piece of property, putting in a charging station for profit? That's my question. Is that assumption just there?
Adam, I do know on the Tesla charging map that the Pleasant Lake Inn is listed as a Tesla designated site. Do we have any idea what they give their power away for free to their guests, or can anybody show up and get a charge and pay $10 or what?
So they have a level 1 residential akin charger for their overnight guests. It is not necessarily open to the public. I think they have had a couple of scenarios where somebody with 10 miles till empty has rolled into their parking lot and they have allowed them to charge it there, but I don't believe that they are set up to actually charge the individual car owner for, I believe it's a complimentary service that they provide to their overnight guests.
Emily, you had a question?
Just verbiage, do we want to say profit or compensation? I mean, profit to me seems like over and above making money on, I mean, do we just want to say flat compensation?
I think part of the question too is the whole, that these are standalone.
Okay.
We're thinking of like, I'm not responding with an answer necessarily, but just like an electric version of Jake's, right? Like a standalone charging facility versus like the example that someone gave of PCs, if they allowed their customers to come and charge. To me, that seems different because it seems ancillary to their business, but it's just kind of a nice thing to have.
Sure.
Versus the sole purpose of their business is charging. And I think that's what we were initially trying to tackle because we had an inquiry about a charging facility here in town. So that was the thing. Joe?
Makes sense.
Yeah, as a resident, okay, would I be allowed to let people pull in the back of our house and charge electrical vehicle up for money under this situation?
You about to start a small business,
Well,
Joe?
No, well, I'm saying, would that be allowed?
No, you're in a residential zone.
Okay.
And so your charger would be there as an accessory use for the use of the property owners. Right. So you can't have the commercial operation. Here, let me change it. The battery packs are on order. They will be here at some point, but for now, we're stuck with the constant changing out.
Okay, so does anyone have a sense of the pleasure of the board here? Oh, sorry. John, you had a comment? Can you come up? I'm sorry, just so everyone can hear. Oh, turn it on, yeah.
Does this mean Jake's could put in 2 charging stations, but not 3?
No, we were looking at 2, we proposed to adjust the wording to 2 or more. So that was, it was less the issue about that than about how do we differentiate from, like, if Jeremy wanted to put some in at his office or, other.
A private office, is that what you mean?
Correct.
Yeah.
And the question of whether, or going back to the example of PCs, if customers could show up there, plug in, and go have a burger and a beer or whatever, then that's different than at least in my mind, that's different than a standalone facility whose purpose is just to charge.
And charge a fee.
And charge a fee.
I see. Yeah. Versus, because I think Colby has a charging.
Correct, they do.
One that's, I think, complimentary.
Right, and that's a level 1, I think, so it's pretty slow, but yeah.
So the proposal is what again?
Well, we're working on that.
Yeah, we're not there yet. I wish we were.
Can I just make a proposal just to start this off? I'm not even sure I'm in favor of it. But we're talking about commercial zones. And we're saying if you want to put one in and charge for it, you've got to get a special, you've got to go by special exception. If it's 3, why not, if you're going to charge for it, it's 1. If you give it away free,
just take out the number and modifier. So charging centers comprised of charging pedestals offered for a commercial.
Offering free electrical charging. Or
well, this wouldn't be
charging
free.
For
this would be
charging.
For profit. So charging centers comprised of charging pedestals for.
What are you going for, Adam? You're talking about.
To show that it's a business endeavor.
Right. So.
Where the user is required to reimburse you for the electrical charge.
Fee for service.
Or call it a commercial operation.
But in that scenario, like a PCs could be a commercial operation, but they may not charge for their guests, right? So if we're trying to say, we want to say that the trigger seems to be that there's
if it has a fee.
If there's a fee associated with it. So if it's a profit making so if it was charging stations comprised of pedestals, or 1 or more pedestals, right? Of more pedestals, sorry.
For use by fee?
For use for a fee by the general public? Does that help?
Read it back just to make sure I have
Yeah,
it
so
right.
charging stations comprised of 1 or more pedestals that doesn't make sense. For use by the general public for a fee. Does that make sense?
So charging centers comprised of 1 or more charging pedestals for use by the general public for a fee.
Correct.
And so then we would also, as Michael wherever
pointed out.
he's,
Yeah,
hidden
back
here,
there, yeah.
suggested, and I think it is a good suggestion, define the electric vehicle charging station. What was that? Not diving into that at this point. So it would be the pedestal to deliver electric charging? Or are there...
I don't know what the wording is.
Yeah, I'm not an EV person yet, so I'm not as familiar with their terminology, but
I think electric charging is fine.
the pedestal to deliver electric charging.
Electric vehicle charging.
To the pedestal that accommodates the electric charging infrastructure. How do people feel about that? The electrical charging infrastructure?
We don't see vehicle, right? Or we do? Can you read it back one more time?
Let me get it written. So this would be electric vehicle charging station, and it is the pedestal that accommodates the electrical charging infrastructure. Thoughts?
I like you. So
now we're
I
down
like
to
those.
one?
It's one or more.
correct.
They could if they got their special
They have to get,
exception.
I mean,
It's
this
not
isn't
a-
by
it's
right. This is not by right. They have to come in, just like a gas station would have to come and get a special exception. They'd have to apply, correct. Yep. It's more the permission to put anything in at all. They would have to come and get us, they would have to come. Correct. Yep. Thanks, John.
Can we read the other adjusted one?
David had a quick question, I think. Yeah. Sorry, thanks.
Sorry. If it's for the general public, so it's free,
Not necessarily.
who determines the price?
The owner.
Who?
The owner, just like Jake's would determine the price
Okay.
for their gas, I mean, private enterprise would
Right.
determine. Okay, you read it back, right, was what you're saying? Yeah, can we do that one more time?
Sure. So the electric vehicle charging station would be the pedestal that accommodates the electrical charging infrastructure at an electric vehicle charging
Do you have an electric?
facility?
Do I have what?
Do you have an electric car?
Just period. Just leave it?
Just leave it.
Yeah.
After infrastructure? Okay.
And
Because it
then
would
can we
come-
read back the other portion that was
Sure,
amended by
Yep.
numerical quantity by Bill and then grammatically by Michael?
Right, so electric vehicle charging station, all capitalized, is a charging center comprised of one or more charging pedestals for use by the general public for a fee.
I move to approve that as amended.
And so, so these would be considered substantive changes.
Yeah,
So
move
we
it to
will-
the next meeting.
Right, so we will advertise for additional public hearing on this one to be on the 24th, if folks are all,
So moved.
okay. And were there any further public comments? We didn't really.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
All right.
Well, it automatically gets triggered. Do we need a second? To move it to the next public hearing?
I mean, I think it makes sense to have a vote
Okay,
and everyone
yeah,
be
let's-
comfortable with the language,
Are we-
but it doesn't
are-
move it to town meeting.
So let's, this is not to move it, to be clear, not to move to town meeting, but to move it to the next public hearing. Are we comfortable with that? Can I get a second to Jeremy's?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Paul, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so the next one is, I think we have some folks from the Messer Pond Protective Association, so maybe they want to speak to this, but we were approached by the Protective Association to ask about removal of invasive or exotic species within the waterfront buffer where we currently regulate removal of vegetation. And so as typical with vegetation removal, the root system needs to stay intact because there's a lot of different environmental benefits of that. But of course, when you're dealing with invasives and exotics, that's not always the case. And sometimes to eradicate them, you actually need to remove the systems. And so we were approached by the Messer Pond Protective Association, who's working on some invasive species removal, and so they brought some language to us, and we worked together, the Planning Board and the Protective Association, in consultation with DES, to come up with this proposal that would allow for that removal in certain circumstances.
Are there any comments from the board on this language? Okay, Michael?
Article 13, under small a, invasive/exotic species should be cut or removed within the wetland buffer. Isn't that what we're talking about? The wetland buffer, not the woodland buffer?
Well, it's the Wetlands Conservation Overlay, but I think it's actually under the heading of the woodland buffer.
It's in the previous paragraph refers to the wetland buffer.
All right, bear with me.
Are we still
Michael.
talking about that?
Wetland and waterfront.
All right, nope, you are correct.
And if it's the wetland buffer, is the wetland buffer a term of art, meaning both words should be capitalized and consistent throughout? And if so, then elsewhere in this language, this paragraphs, we need to be consistent when we say wetland buffer. It's a term of art, I believe.
So I think
I don't know if it's relevant yet, but wetland buffers seems to be defined in 13B3.
And is it capitalized in 13.3B?
Yeah, it is.
Then it should be consistent
Right.
throughout.
Yep.
I think it should be. I just...
Yep, so we'll make that change.
I know these are nitpick things,
Nope,
but
this is-
we're just trying to
this is
make
what
it
you're here for.
as good as we can.
Thanks.
And then in the third red paragraph, I think there's some terms of art in that as well. Specifically, pesticide application license. Is that the technical term for what they get in order to be able to apply these pesticides? And if it is issued by the Department of Agriculture, that should be capitalized? And likewise, the Division of Pesticide Control, is that a state agency that, and if they're specific state agencies, they should be capitalized and uniform? I don't know, because I don't generally deal with those folks, but.
I believe they are. John, are you familiar? I believe they are. The division, right, so, yep.
Yeah, that's all on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
That's just capitalized.
I think if we're going to do second public hearings, we might as well just do this then too. I think if. So we believe that that is the case. We will confirm that before the second public hearing. Okay, so that is.
Do we need to vote? So we make it?
Yes, sorry.
So can we vote then on moving this to the next public hearing?
I move to move it to the next public hearing.
Second.
With the capitalizations.
Yeah, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
So, and I know this is a little out of order if you're okay with that, but I know that there's also some people here that that there's another one that may be quicker than the housing, that the petition zoning amendment, if we wanted to try to bump up to that one, if I think that might be a faster one than the housing. So this is the petition zoning amendment for the addition of the conservation areas, nature hiking and trails, and we'll let the petitioner explain that. Just hit the button so it turns green. Yep, there you go.
All right, there we go. I'm sorry about the mask. I'm the one that's been coughing in the background. I've had it for weeks. I just wanted to say I'm Sue Andrews. I'm here speaking as an individual resident of the town of New London. Full disclosure, I know a lot about trails in New London from two different angles. I am a member of the New London Conservation Commission, but I am not speaking on their behalf. And I am a former employee of Osborne Sargent, but I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm here because this amendment to the ordinance would allow for conservation areas and nature and hiking trails in the residential districts. And right now, they are not a permitted use in residential districts. The master plan refers in several places to the importance of trails in the community. In the vision action items, there is a bullet that says, encourage the development and maintenance of trails and sidewalks to enhance the town's distinction as a pedestrian and cyclist-friendly walkable community. There's also a section under conservation and recreation where there's a bullet that says, develop multi-use trails and walkable community plans. It seems that the master plan encourages trails, but the zoning ordinance doesn't permit them. So New London, as you all know, has a great trail system. Some of them are on town-owned land in residential districts, and since the town doesn't have to comply with their own regulations, those ones are permitted. An example would be Clark Pond. There's nice trails out there, but they are owned by the town. But there's a number of trails that are on private land. One example would be Knights Hill Park in the core property. That property is privately owned by the Outing Club. Another example is Lion Brook Trail. Parts of that are owned by the town and parts of that are owned by private individuals. Spring Ledge Farm has trails that are privately owned by Spring Ledge Farm. And the Messer property has trails that are privately owned by Osborne Sargent. All of these are examples of areas where trails are not actually permitted under the ordinance. So I think it would be a benefit to the town to amend the ordinance so that these trails would be permitted in residential districts.
And just for the board to understand, I think it maybe has been a little while since they've seen a petition zoning amendment, so just so everyone is up to date on that. So your job this evening, when something is petitioned for a zoning amendment, it's not your decision whether it goes to the ballot. It is going to the ballot because they have their 25 signatures. They have well more than that. And so for the board tonight, what your job is to identify if you support the amendment or not, and that goes on the ballot, and it will say by planning board support of X to X. So just so you understand what your duty is tonight.
Excuse me, I have a couple of questions, Sue. I'm having trouble, and maybe because it's getting late and my brain is fried, but I'm having trouble understanding what role the property owner plays in this. Do they have any rights that are superseded by this amendment that you're recommending?
Yes, I would say that yes, the property owner can choose to have a trail or not to have a trail. But right now, the property owner isn't allowed to have a trail if the property is in the residential, any of the residential zones.
Okay. So it doesn't prescribe anything that require the property owner to do anything that would be against their best interest?
No.
No, and that's not to say that, zoning and the potential conservation easements that may exist on these properties are sort of two very different things, and there may be conservation easements on their properties that they purchased that supersede their individual rights, but that doesn't have to do with
this.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to make certain. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the board? Paul?
What is the outcome when property owner A has been allowing people to truck through part of his or her property for 20 years and then decides, well, let's put it this way, how about property owner A leaves his property to his great aunt Millie and he dies and great aunt Millie inherits the property? Does that permission to have people walking through the trail on that property go to the next owner?
So that's a totally different ball of wax that gets into legal easements and right-of-ways.
Right. Yes, I know.
It's a different game. And my understanding is that these, and please jump in, Sue, if I'm saying this incorrectly, but my understanding would be that these would be intended for use of the general public, not necessarily identified that you as an abutting property owner have a right-of-way over my property to access whatever you would be looking to access. But this would be for the general public and not solely for an individual or an individual property. Right?
Correct.
Because a prescriptive easement becomes a whole different and very complicated situation.
I guess that was, may I speak for? I guess that was my concern because, and I'm certainly not an attorney, but after a certain length of time where the general public has been allowed to, walk on a particular part of the property, that becomes a right, doesn't it?
I am not a lawyer.
And it may become a right that's really outside of the zoning ordinance, and that would be up to the property owner to determine before they're allowing access to their property, to define that with whoever it is they're granting that right to. If it's an informal granting of that right, then eventually, with so many years of open and notorious, I think is the legal term, use, then you could potentially...
You have an easement.
Right. I'm looking to my three lawyers on that side of the room to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but...
I have a question for the board first, and does anyone not think that having a trail is an ancillary use to residential real estate?
So I think the key to this is that not all properties are residential, that there are properties that are owned solely for the capacity of conservation and public access, whether that be Osmond Sargent or some other entity other than the Conservation Commission, like Sue answered. So on a residential property, very well could, I think, be considered an...
And I'm saying residential in the zoning sense. An agricultural or residential land, I don't think we're talking about commercial land here. Is it not an ancillary, I don't know the answer. I asked the question, is it an ancillary use to have a trail?
And what would be the implications of that, Paul, if it were?
My property, I can have a trail. I think what they're trying to say is they're worried that people own land and feel that they're doing something wrong by having a trail because it's not specifically stated in the zoning ordinance. Is that?
Yes, it's not stated in the zoning ordinance that you can have a trail on private property, on residential property. It's only stated that there can be trails in the Forest Conservation District. So, you know, the Knights Hill Park trails, the Messer Farm trails, accordingly preserve, they can't expand, they're not permitted. They exist, but they're not permitted.
Are they not permitted because it's specifically stated that they're permitted?
It's my understanding that the zoning ordinance has to specifically say they are permitted for them to be permitted. So this is asking to add that sentence that lets them be permitted.
Right, and I think there may be some confusion between, you know, you as a property owner having trails that you enjoy on your property, that is an accessory use to your own use of that property. In this scenario, it is a trail network that is open to the public and not solely the property owner and their guests.
I think we're getting into some woods here that we don't want to get into. And I think, my view, having or not having a trail is the right of the property owner, and we want to be careful about extending that right beyond the property owner.
I don't think this is extending it beyond the right of the property owner. It's the property owner who
Right,
can't
so
do
because
what they want to do
building-
with their property.
Right.
So, I think to create a fake example, the Knights Hill trails are not permissible as written. They exist as non-conforming uses. Correct, Adam? So because they existed, they continue to exist in a zone as a non-conforming use. However, if an abutter to that trail wanted to extend it and there is not one there now, they cannot by right do so. The proposed change would allow them to do so, extend the trail across their property to their property bounds. Of course, getting into the legal part that Adam mentioned, that once they do so, then, you know, there's a legal ramification to allowing people use of that trail. I won't even wade into what that equates to, but it's still the property owner's choice to do so, and in doing so, they should do their own research into what that involves.
I'll ask one more question, then I'll shut up.
I think Peter's had his hand up for a little while.
All right,
though.
sorry.
So that everybody understands correctly, in this case, your example at Knights Hill Park trails were developed after the zoning ordinance was adopted, and it was not a permitted use. So it's not a legal non-conforming use. They are illegal trails. There's no statute of limitations on the zoning violations. So that goes on forever. So you have to be very specific about when something was adopted when you start talking about it being a legal non-conforming use. In this case, those trails are not legal non-conforming.
Sorry.
Thanks, Peter. Paul, did you want to?
Why are they illegal?
They were created after zoning, not before. I thought they were created before.
And we have a permissive zoning.
That was my bad assumption.
And why does that matter?
Because they're not an existing non-conforming use, because they were created after the zoning.
They're a violation.
They're a violation of zoning because they occurred after the zoning ordinance was created.
Which didn't permit it.
My assumption was it predated zoning.
There's something that doesn't permit
Correct.
trail?
Yes, our zoning as written right now doesn't permit it.
Okay, well, that was my first question.
Which is why we're trying to do
Okay,
this.
I'm sorry.
They're not permitted under the zoning. This one sentence would now permit them.
So I think the question, or maybe there's more public.
All right, so Peter,
Can I add one more thing?
sure.
The trails on a person's property that are ancillary to a residence that exists on the property are not an issue. But trails on properties that do not have an established residential use cannot be accessory to that residential use. Therefore, you need to specifically permit them on a property that stands alone with no other, kind of typical residential use like a house or a series of structures that somehow relate to a house somewhere else.
So I don't know if there's any other public comment, but I think that.
Can you come up, John? I'm sorry, it's harder to hear.
If anyone wanted to establish a new trail on their residential property, how does this affect them? Well, how would this affect someone? If they wanted to establish a new trail, assuming this is passed, on their property and one does not exist now, does that affect?
Is it a residential property?
Yes.
So now, if this were to pass, that would be an allowed use that could be established.
Right, but this isn't restricting any existing owner or future owner that has a trail on their property from also saying, I want to stop the use of that trail or that segment.
This would not speak to that. However, whatever, it would be case by case specific as far as what agreement they had with whatever entity maybe held easements on those trail or whatever, but that would be far outside of the zoning ordinance. This would not prohibit them from stopping that if their own current setup allowed for that.
Right, and
the zoning ordinance would not have bearing on that.
right, and will this affect any liability to the property owner for anyone that has an accident?
That is outside of the zoning ordinance.
That's outside. Okay.
Thanks, John. Steve? Sorry.
Steve Root, I live in New London, just got here 34 years ago. Just wanted to point out a couple things. So in New Hampshire, if you have land and you haven't posted it, people can walk on it. They'll prefer to walk on trails if they have the chance. So in the Forest Conservation Article 9, conservation areas and nature and hiking trails is a permitted use. In the institutional district, Article 10, trails for hiking, biking, cross-country skiing, and equestrian uses are permitted uses. In the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District, Steep Slope Overlay District, and Streams Conservation Overlay District, variations on this, wildlife refuges, conservation areas, nature trails are permitted. So on my land where I have a steep slope, I can have a trail right to the edge of where the steep slope overlay district ends. What I'm saying is, this is a very simple proposal to fix an oversight that doesn't authorize conservation areas and nature trails in residential districts. I would point out that if it's adopted, it will also fix that problem in ARR, because in ARR, anything that's permitted in R1, R2 is permitted there. So we're fixing a lot of stuff here. I would urge the planning board to support this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen.
And so now you would, if someone is inclined, assuming there's no more public comment or board comment, make a motion to.
And again, yeah, just as Adam said, we just need to decide opine on whether we want to support or not support this. We don't have any say about whether it goes to town meeting. I'm sorry, Michael, I didn't see you.
I was going to suggest that maybe you might want to add the words after trails with consent of the landowner. But if, as Stephen has so eloquently pointed out, this exact language exists already in other areas of the ordinance, and it doesn't have that with consent of the owner, so maybe we don't need it.
Right, and with this board can't adjust this language anyway because it's petition.
Understood.
So, yeah,
Understood.
but thank you.
Do we individually agree, or do we vote
just
to
vote.
agree?
I think we would,
To support, rather?
yeah, we could get a motion to support this, and if that's what the pleasure of the board is, and then we can vote, just like a normal, right? I'm not crazy? Yeah.
You're right. I move to support this public,
Move that the board
I move
support.
that the board support this public petition.
Second.
Who is the second?
That's Emily, that's, she can't.
But you're not a voting member.
No, I'm not.
Joe, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
All ain't here.
And that was unanimous?
Yep. Any opposed, any abstention? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
What's that?
Correct. So it would read for the 6 full-time members who are here tonight that it would be unanimous by a vote of 6-0. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to the 3 of you for sticking it out. I'm sure that it's a long meeting. And for the rest of you who have stuck with us for the evening. So, all right. Let me just pull up our
Article 26.
next article.
Workforce housing overlay.
All right. So I think I will start by giving a brief overview of the concept of why we're here, and then I think we'll allow Peter from the Housing Commission and Mark, the consultant, to speak, and then we will jump into the public hearing. So many of you are aware that for the last I think 13 years, we have had a workforce housing overlay district as part of our zoning ordinance. This, in 2009, this was done as a response to state law changing, requiring communities to make reasonable and realistic accommodations for workforce housing. In the intervening 13 years, we have not had a single application, and so obviously the housing landscape has changed dramatically in the 13 years, and so has how the state responds to housing. There's now a Board of Housing Appeals. We've seen different projects go through a variety of applications, and then what happens in appeals at the state level. And so the Housing Commission really jumped in by hiring a consultant to help us look at ours and identify areas that maybe we have learned something from our own experience and the experience of other communities in the last 13 years, and how we could modify ours. And so there's, I would say, a fair amount of redlining in here, but really the meat and potatoes of what changed are on page 109 and 110, which relate to the table of uses and to the density increases. And so the way that the ordinance was written, it gave the planning board essentially full latitude to waive basically any part of the ordinance to accommodate a developer who proved to them that they needed to achieve one of those waivers in order for the project to be viable. This provides some more context to that and gives the planning board a little bit more guidance as far as how many units per acre of net tract area would be allowed in different styles, and while still allowing for potential waivers should a developer not be able to conform to that, they still have an opportunity where they could present a case for a waiver, but it does provide a little bit better overview for a developer to go in and know how many units they could at least achieve at a minimum. So without going too much further into detail, I do just want to touch on a couple of comments that came in from town council. And so we will be needing to do a second public hearing. We know this already, but I just want to go through a couple of changes in here that we need to discuss tonight. So bear with me. So under G1, there was a mistake in the numbering where it went from C to E, so that needs to be corrected to renumber E to D and F to E. So that's the first one. That's minor. I think everyone will be on board with that. And then the second component that town council brought up is on page 115 under L3B. And there were concerns over the waivers being specific to G, Section G, and they felt that the language should be updated to remove the end of the sentence so that it reads, the planning board may affirm, alter, or rescind any or all of the conditions or restrictions of approval after such meeting in order to provide for reasonable and realistic opportunity for the creation of workforce housing units. The planning board is authorized to consider relaxing or waiving one or more of the standards in the town's land use ordinances and regulations, period. And that's where it would end there and eliminate the rest of that sentence. And then the final component that they recommended is the deletion of section M in its entirety, that this is not required. It speaks to the appeals procedures, which are outlined in state law. And so they felt that we do not need to cover this within the ordinance, that it already exists. So of course, deleting M means that the subsequent sections there are all renumbered to, or relettered to jump up there. So those were the three changes that were requested by council. And that's a brief overview. And then if Peter and Mark want to jump in. So I think, Marianne, if it's okay, if we can let Peter and Mark get through. Thanks.
In the interest of time, I'll waive some thoughts I had because I think they're kind of self-explanatory, just touch on a few of the high points. My name is Peter Nichols. I'm chairman of the Housing Commission. Thank you for hearing us tonight. We've come a long way, and we've all come to learn and realize there's a serious need for workforce housing in this town. We feel it, and our commission was formed 2 years ago to address it. We've met over 35 times in the last 2 years, in work sessions, panels, sessions with the planning board, and all public hearings to address these changes. And we've put a lot of thought with our consultant who's advised us appropriately on how to make them. This is not a large-scale change presented tonight, but the tweaking of an existing code to facilitate what we want to do, which is to encourage private development and nonprofit development of workforce housing in our town. The planning board has always had the ability to waive whatever they needed to encourage workforce housing under the workforce housing bylaw that exists today. But the problem with it is that it doesn't provide predictability. And as a former developer, we would always go in and look at a property and say, what's the minimum we think we can get with some confidence? Well, it may sound like being open to whatever is recommended by a developer as a starting point sounds like encouraging development. It actually is deterrent, because the developer has to go through the planning, designing, engineering, and justification for what they're proposing, all to be sent back to a drawing board if it isn't quite correct. So it extends the process, and it even gives it a much higher risk factor. So rule number one for developers is predictability and ability to judge the amount of time and capital it takes to accomplish something, and that's what we're trying to accomplish by doing that. That being said, if these bylaw changes are adopted by you and by town meeting vote, it's not going to happen overnight. This kind of scale of development takes a long time. Laws need to be revised and modified as living documents that reflect the way we live at the time and what we want to happen. And this is time for a change today to get to work on this issue. And our role as the Housing Commission will be to continue to monitor the effects of these zoning changes and how they should be adjusted even further. And we even have some grandiose ideas as to other things to bring to the town next year as we move forward. So we are, of course, in support of these zoning revisions and are here to take questions and answer any that you may have. There's two things I want to mention. One, there's a typographic error in what was proposed to you, and it has to do with the word acre being inserted. And where it's inserted is, when you talk about the density of units on a piece of land, you talk about density of units per acre. And it's kind of like how many pounds per square foot in your tires of your car. In the shorthand, what developers and people do when they work with this stuff long-term is they tend to drop words off because it's just what you're doing and you know it's going to be there. Well, if you look in section G on page 109, FJ, density increase. It says multi-family garden-style apartments are permitted at 10 units per net tract area. Well, it's actually per acre of net tract area because that's a unit of measurement. So I mention this as really just being a problem with shorthand, and I have to confess I looked over it time and time and time again and didn't pick it up. But that's what it was intended to mean, and that's what it means, and that's really the only way you measure density is per acre. Last thing I want to mention is the Regional Planning Commission, of which we are a part, released a draft of housing needs assessment that was just updated in 2023. It's a draft form. But it's interesting that they projected that New London in 2025 needs 81 more rental and ownership workforce housing units. 81 more rental and ownership workforce housing units. And we haven't built any in the last 13 years. So there's more as that document gets refined and released permanently, but in final form. But I want you to know we have a lot of work to do, and tonight's the start. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
A, B, and C under G, you want 10 units per acre net tract area, 6 units per acre net tract area, and so you want both to be amended?
Yes, wherever it references on a per net tract area, insert per acre of net tract area.
Of net tract area.
Per acre of net tract area. Wherever it says per.
Got it.
Okay? Yeah.
Peter, on that same point, I was going to bring up that point too. I'm sorry that I even screwed it up in the memo that I put together. Further point on that, does that apply to each zone? For example, I'm thinking that in the commercial zone, 10 units per acre is not a lot. In the R1 zone, which is 10,000 feet, it's, half more. In the 2 acre zone, is it 10 per acre, 10 per 2 acres? I just don't know if there aren't different, if to the betterment of this, it isn't different for each zone. I see Mark with some thoughts on that, so.
Why don't you go ahead, step up, please.
I'll touch on that, Paul, when I get it. I don't want to spend a lot of time. We've talked about this a lot. Mark Fougere, Fougere Planning. I've been working with the Housing Commission over the past year. The commission's worked very, very hard, as well as the board on this amendment. I was brought in to take a look at the ordinance with fresh eyes and make some recommendations. Obviously, this was adopted in response to state statute, but there were some obstacles and some trying language in here that really prevented workforce housing projects from moving forward. And my job was to take a critical eye at that, and that's what the recommendations that are in red are coming from, and that's the purpose of it. To your point, Paul, the Table 1 outlines the different uses where they're allowed in what zones. So it doesn't apply, the 10 units per acre isn't allowed everywhere. That's for multifamily garden buildings, which are allowed in the R1 in the commercial zone. We're expanding the workforce housing overlay to include the hospital, institutional, if you recall, and also the college institutional. So it's depending, the chart in Table 1 sort of dictates where those uses are allowed. Other changes that we included have to do with the conditional use permit criteria, the administrative end of things to try to clear up some of that language. There was also a series of redundant commentary in here or language that we felt was not necessary, and we're recommending deleting of that. But the whole goal of these changes is to provide reasonable and realistic opportunities for workforce housing. It's very imperative that an ordinance be in place that's actually viable, that someone can actually come forward and do a project, make a profit, but also adhere to the goal to expand, which is to expand workforce housing opportunities in this community. I think it's been made pretty clear that there's definitely a need. The adoption of these changes isn't going to guarantee anything, obviously. You still need a private entity to come forward and do something, but I think it's going to be a major step forward if they are adopted.
Again, it's getting late and my brains are fried, but Paul raised a question and I think I just want to make sure I understand. Essentially, what I think you said, Mark, was that the fact that multifamily townhomes are allowed in these various zones, the various districts, doesn't change at all the 10 units per acre of net tract area. So for instance, the residential is an R2, which requires 2 acres. So in essence, you'd be able to build 20 units in that particular zone.
Not in the R2, because multifamily gardens aren't allowed. You could only do 6 units per acre.
In multifamily?
Yes, under multifamily townhomes in the R2.
Yes, and so...
So you couldn't do 20.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it'd be 12.
Okay, so townhomes...
You can only do 12.
6, got it.
Yeah.
So you would end up with 12?
Yes,
Okay.
assuming you had good land.
Yes.
Because you have to take your
You'd be
lot.
Net.
Right. You got to take out any
Of those
steep
per-
slopes, wetlands, floodplain.
That's the net.
Right.
So you've got to have net acres
Right.
of...
So if you had a 2-acre lot and an acre was not appropriate, you'd only have 1 acre,
Got it.
6 units.
Got it. Does that clarify things, Paul, for you?
Yeah, I think so. I was focused on a different issue.
Oh, rats. I was hoping it would clarify things.
Currently, our statute allows 8.5 units per acre in the commercial zone and 4.25 per acre in R1. I was reading what you had written totally differently, and it's 80 acres, units per acre, but it seems to me that 10 in a zone in which we are hoping to encourage multifamily development is not as expansive as maybe we want to go. I mean, an acre of commercial land could support any more than 10 garden apartments, I would think.
You could support more?
I would think.
Well, you have the ability to add, approve more if you want to.
Okay, well, as I said, I had misread.
You have that flexibility.
Okay, I misread it when I did the memo, and I think the way you're defining it now makes sense.
Yeah. And just remember, I mean, today, the board has a significant amount of flexibility in the ordinance for density now. It's basically, what do you want to do? But that was part of the problem, is crept a lot of anxiety and doubt in people's minds, so.
Fine.
Thank you. Okay, are there other comments from the public? Michael?
As a member of the ZBA, we've been required to attend several sessions put on by the Municipal Association as part of the process of learning the concept of zoning and what it means and the reason for why it exists. So when I reviewed this table and looked at these proposed additional residential uses in these certain zones, a certain phrase came to mind that from the studies that we'd done, and that is that the fundamental premise of zoning is a separation and use of land for specific uses. And in our zoning ordinance, we have identified different zones, and we've even recently added another, which curiously doesn't appear on the table, and that would be the theater area. Are they proposing to allow residential use of that as well? And I say, if you allow residential use in the hospital zone, in the college zone, you are defeating the fundamental premise of zoning. I don't have a problem with multifamily townhouses in urban R1, R2, ARR, or even commercial. But I do have a fundamental problem with inclusion of residential use in the hospital institution, the college institution, and if they proposed it in the theater. Because I believe it defeats the fundamental premise of the zoning theory, and I would not support that portion of the amendment for those reasons. As evidence of that, I cite this section on Roman 5 of our Zoning Board of Adjustment in New Hampshire, this local handbook that's in all the handouts that we all get as zoning board members. In the second paragraph under Roman 5 page, it says, as our nation and its cities grew in size and complexity, it became apparent that haphazard growth and mixing of industry, commerce, and housing were resulting in a loss of land values. And what we're saying with this chart is, yeah, we have certain zones, you can only do these things, but residential, you can put that anywhere. And I think that is a big mistake with respect to the hospital and the college institutional zones. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
And just some feedback on that, Michael, I think it is important to realize that it's not carte blanche all residential that would be allowed in those zones. It is purely the residential under the workforce housing overlay that would be allowed. And it is somewhat in response to those institutions having a desire to have some flexibility at some point to potentially house their workers. That's the land that they have control over. If sort of private development does not take care of the housing on other land, that is land that they have some ability and control over to try to bolster their institutional use of finding staff and providing the housing. So in both scenarios, it was the institutions who encourage the potential addition into this specifically for workforce, not in general, not for the hospital to become a housing developer.
I understand. Have any institutions come to you and said, gee, this is something we'd like to consider, we'd like to have the option to do this, or is this us trying to foresee that they might someday need that option?
We consulted with both institutions who said that though they do not have immediate plans to do anything of that nature, that they could see where that would be an important part of their completing their mission as either an educational institution or as a health institution. And in the larger Dartmouth-Hitchcock realm, they have done this on the Lebanon campus where they have, their zoning is obviously a little bit different, but they have parcels of land adjacent that they have worked with Twin Pines and others to actually support and be partners in constructing the housing. So I don't think, though New London Hospital is not necessarily at a point where they're ready to build any housing on their institutional land, another provider within their healthcare network has done something similar.
Well, part of our condition is that the zones that were created as institutional for the college and the hospital are quite comparatively small. They were cut out around the buildings that were existing, and likewise with the theater. So there isn't a lot of extra space that would lend itself well to this kind of development were it economically feasible. What I was concerned about is those persons owning residences bordering the institutional zones bought those houses and improved them with the understanding that they would always be bordering an institution, that college students would come and go. I don't think they ever contemplated a development with substantially higher density such as workforce housing, on that property. And I think it's a dangerous precedent to allow that residential development. I understand they need options, and I'm not against workforce housing, quite the contrary. But I just look at this fundamental premise of zoning, and I think we're tenuously close to breaching it. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Oh, sorry, Peter, I didn't see it.
Just a couple of quick follow-up comments. First of all, at a panel, we had the college and the hospital present, their CEOs and presidents speaking, and I heard very specifically Tom Mannion say that if we don't do something about the workforce problem we have, the hospital may not be around forever. It was that serious. They suggested that it dealt with their livelihood and they just weren't sure how it was going to play out. I heard that loud and clear. Secondly, the college, I heard at a previous hearing or perhaps through some discussion, has been looking at possibilities for taking some of their underutilized dormitory space and converting it to staff housing, which is a challenge, I'm sure, from a zoning perspective, but also physically and from a cost perspective. So you're already seeing the pressures that exist with the college in particular as to that point. Lastly, I would say that this town is darn lucky to have the college and the hospital here in our presence. And if it means sacrificing a little bit of development of their land, which I'm sure they wouldn't give up easily, for workforce housing, and it's only for workforce housing that this exception is provided, then I think we should consider it very seriously, and that's why we put this forth. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. All right. Yep, Steve?
Steve Root, still living in New London? Although it's getting late. Yeah. Okay, a couple things. I'm sorry, I have to focus here. Okay, you bet. So on page 109F, there's a highlighted phrase that I don't really understand. It says amend to include all college lot 33 and hospital lands lot 18. I assume this is what Michael was discussing, but I just don't understand the wording of this. It looks like it was a drafting note.
I think it was a drafting note that was intended actually to cue the change to the map, the overlay district on the map, so the note should come out.
Okay.
Sorry. Just to help clarify, it was put in there so you knew exactly the overlay map excluded those two properties from the district, from the workforce housing district. So we put a note there to show which lots are now going to be part of that district. It's more of a directional note. It won't be part of the ordinance, but the map has to be changed to reflect that overlay district's going to cover those two lots. That's what that's for.
And it's worth also just clarifying too that this does not include the recreational college. That will continue to be a hole in the middle of the overlay map that this was not a use intended there.
All righty. Just a typo on page 109 in G1, now D, although it shows up as E. You're missing a key word. It says that any calculation of workforce housing or market rate housing units that does result in a whole number shall increase the next whole number. Obviously, that should be does not result in a whole number. So, yeah, there we go. Over on, again under G1, now E, I guess, multifamily garden-style buildings. So, in number 4, well, under setback reductions, we're deleting a sentence that had some significance, I think. It said, at a minimum, there shall be a 50-foot setback from the property line around the perimeter of the property. You may recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this was the catch that stopped Continuum from their workforce housing proposal on the property behind the gallery. I believe there was a lot of support for that setback restriction from their neighbors, the Hilltop residents. And so I'm wondering if it shouldn't be retained, or maybe relaxed a little bit, but it has some significance, so I'd urge you to think carefully about it. So I'm a little confused about one aspect of this, and there's a lot of words here, so I don't fully understand it. If a workforce housing project's approved and it's going to have a 20 or 30-year period during which rentals have to meet certain standards or sales have to meet certain standards, what is the enforcement mechanism that the planning board has to when the property is let's talk about the fee sale possibility? How do we know that it'll still be workforce housing in its sale price, affordable, when the first owner sells to the second sells to the third, and so forth? You help me out there?
So in both cases, for owner-occupied and rental, the way this is structured is there are going to be deed covenants placed on the property that will go for the life of the restriction. So for an owner-occupied, it'll be a 20-year restriction. It'll be in the deed. Every time you sell a property, an attorney reviews that deed. When they do the deed research, obviously it'll be upon responsibility of that attorney. If he or she's doing her job properly to find that restriction, and obviously the owner living in the unit is going to realize and know that it's a workforce housing unit. And on rental properties that's owned by one entity, they're required to report yearly to the planning board that the units are being rented to occupants who meet the affordable requirement, and that's a report that's submitted to the planning board. This is a zoning provision, obviously. If there's an alleged violation, the selectmen will be the body that will have to enforce it, just like any other zoning ordinance that's presently involved with the community.
All right, I think I just have one more question on this. Bear with me a second. So the existing ordinance in what is incentives for workforce housing, currently on 109, basically has an economic test that the developer has to come in and show that it needs relief from various things that you're empowered to give them relief on in order for the project to be economically viable. That's being deleted from the preamble to G, but part of it seems to have shown up again in another section, which is I-7 on page 113. And as I read it, it looks like what you're doing is saying that economic test has to be met, the evidence has to be there from the developer that it needs relief from some things that currently is required for a greater number of things. And so I don't get why we're not conditioning the planning board's relief on really the full panoply of what you're entitled or empowered to relieve, to relax as waivers under the zoning ordinance based on an overall presentation from the developer that it needs relief from X, Y, and Z in order to do the project. So explain that.
My understanding on that, Steve, is that with the preamble being before the density increase section in entirety, that's speaking to also the built-in density increase, not just the waivers, correct, Mark? And so with eliminating it there, but making sure it's still on page 113, it's specific to the waivers, which used to be the only incentive that we had built in, whereas now that financial package would not be required as part of the density increase. Does that make sense? So instead of having it a preamble over the density increased and the waivers, whereas it only applies to the waivers section. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so, so by
puzzled.
having it in the preamble of G,
Yeah.
it pertains to both the 1 density increase.
You're right.
And 2, 3, 4, 5, and
Right.
6.
Yeah.
Where in the rewrite, it would not pertain to the 1 on the density increase, right?
Oh, I read it the opposite way, that it still applies to the density increase, but not to the other.
If you want to get denser,
Yeah. So,
if you want to have more density in the commercial zone, for example, that one member said, then you'd have to petition with more detail, okay? Yeah. And, well, Peter, you wanted to say something.
This just gets to my point of predictability, that there's a base case the developer can rely on, doesn't have to give you pro formas and open finances and everything for the base case. But if they come in requesting a waiver, then they have to go open kimono.
so just so I'm clear though, if that waiver was to lot size, road frontage, setbacks, and all the other things, if there's a waiver, you have to make the economic case. Thank you very much.
Sorry for my disjointed explanation. It's been a long day.
Any other comments from the public? And from the board? Jeremy?
I have one, since this has to get bounced anyway. I propose changing relaxing or waiving, which is in the section that we were just talking about, to waiving or modifying by waiver. I'm just being picky, but there is no, the state doesn't define relaxing as a thing that the board can do.
Can you cite it, Jeremy?
Sorry, it's, I'm getting there. Hold on. Jeez. It is page 115, 3B. The planning board is authorized to consider relaxing or waiving one or more of the standards. If we relax something, we're waiving it. So relaxing is not a separate thing. If we relax something, we are granting a waiver.
So what's the?
That's your existing language.
I know it's our existing language. It's an opportunity to correct it. So I would propose that we change relaxing or waiving to waiving or modifying by waiver.
I think
Just waiving?
Okay. I'm good with that too.
Okay.
I agree with those relaxing.
Yeah. Okay.
It sounds better than
So is it okay if I just run through my copy real quick and go over all of the changes? Okay. All right, so page 109. We will delete the highlighted portion there that's the reference to the maps.
Yes.
Correct? We will add acre of before net tract area in the definitions for garden and townhome. On the following page of 110, we will update the lettering there to be sequential. On page 115, we will eliminate relaxing or, and then add a period at the end of that sentence after regulations, and eliminate everything after that. And then we will eliminate all of section M and renumber the following letters. Did I miss anything?
The not.
Oh, the not. Yes. And I'm pretty sure I made that note, but let me just check. Yep, it is on here. All right. Yep.
He got it.
I just missed it in my explanation. Anything else that?
You got the fraction calculation change? Right.
If it does not.
Does not?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Steve, did you have one other one, or was that the one? Okay. All right, so then if everyone is comfortable with what has been edited, then you would make a motion to move to second public hearing on January 24th.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you all
Second.
for
All in
sticking it out.
favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you all. Appreciate your time. Sorry.
Okay, so real quick, planning board members, we have one more thing to do.
Yep, we didn't do the minutes either. I forgot to
Right,
mention that.
so I'll just give you the dates real quick.
So, planning board, we're nearly done. Thank you.
Okay, so we just need to approve the minutes, and we have 4
Set.
different dates that have been updated. They were October, thanks guys,
Thank you.
October 27th, November 15th, I think. November 15th, December 1st, and December 8th. So does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns on any of those 4 meeting date nights? Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Would anyone remember if they did?
Can you approve all of them at once?
No, they were separate.
I think we can do it as once, and the minutes will reflect individual votes. Okay. All right, so on the October 27th and November 15th.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Is there, say the dates again, I'm sorry.
October 27th and November 15th.
Any amendments, any changes? Any motion to approve?
Move to approve as presented.
Second? Paul seconded. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
And then December 1st and December 8th.
Move to approve as presented.
Joe second, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
And then Paul abstains from
Yes, Paul
that last
abstained
one.
from, that last group. Thank you.
Awesome.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Yes.
Oh, and one very important thing, on the 24th, I believe we are trying to gather an hour early, is that right? 5:30? So if everyone could be here from 5:30 to 6:30 for a social hour to honor Paul and to say thank you for his years of leading us. We'll have some refreshments, so please put that on your calendars. No alcohol, 1 before meeting, 2 town property, sorry. Right, so 5:30, it's not an official public gathering, so it's not going to be posted anywhere. It'll still say it's 6:30, but we are inviting you all for a social gathering. And Trina, please feel free to come too if you're...
And it'll be here, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, the goose.
Oh yeah, so between now and Thursday, that has to get done, and then it gets reposted Thursday for the 24th. So, thank you, guys. I know.
Thank you all, yeah. Sorry it was such a long night. I appreciate everybody hanging in there. Everybody gets the endurance award.